Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai. Look, welcome everybody to our Palmerston City Council meeting of Wednesday, the 1st of September 2021. First day of spring, and for those in this part of the world, first day of level 3 for us. So welcome councillors, to staff and presenters and members of the public online. Look, just want to explain that the meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on the City Council's YouTube channel. If I could ask that councillors, if you can keep your cameras turned on, please, but microphones muted unless you're addressing the meeting as per our normal etiquette. Please, if you use the hands up function to indicate if you'd like to ask a question, comment or propose an amendment, and if you'd like to please text that amendment or the text for that amendment, sorry, if that could be emailed to the committee administrators. Look, recommendations for the meeting will go up on the screen, displayed on the screen, but I'll read them where they're not where it's not possible to see everything. So bear with me because there is quite a bit of work to get through today. Voting will be by voice and a raised hand, and I'll announce the voting result. Of course, we have the division option if required as well. Look, if you could please, perhaps just councillors, presenters, just give your name at the start before you speak. And we've just to acknowledge we've changed the order of agenda slightly to enable some external presenters to speak. So we have under item 14, the CEO's 3 Water report will be taken after item 5, presentation from Te Mata Arawai, so the New Zealand Water Regulator. So look, I'll take regular breaks throughout, but we'll definitely have a morning tea break, a lunch break at approximately 12, and another afternoon break at 3 o'clock, but there will be other regular breaks as well. So councillors, going through our order of business, apologies, and I have an apology from Councillor Petrinas, and I'll look to move that, if I be seconded by the Deputy Mayor, thank you. And no questions to that. Right, we'll vote please by voice and a show of hands. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstained? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to notification of additional items. I don't have any, so we will we'll look to move on to number 3, which is declarations of interest. And there is a couple, myself included. So we have on item 22, the Tamakuku Terrace, Councillor Dennison, and we'll just ask to leave the meeting there. And the same with item 13, Councillor Dingwell and myself will pass that over. I'll leave and pass that over to the Deputy Mayor to chair. Right, we now move to number 4 on our agenda paper. That's page 7 of your papers, councillors, and a warm welcome to our colleagues at Local Government New Zealand. I feel like I see you just about every day, Susan and Stuart, but welcome to the meeting. Susan Freeman-Green, who's the CEO, and Stuart Crosby, who of course is our President of Local Government New Zealand. I'll now pass to you, Susan, Stuart.
Tēnā koutou, Your Worship, and good morning to all elected members, as well as the senior management team. Just a question, Your Worship, how long would you like us to give an overview of the current position?
Oh, look, you could spend all day doing that, I suppose, Stuart. But look, if you could give us the high level, I'm not going to put a time limit on it because it is a very important issue. But look, if we could 10 minutes or so to give us a rundown from each of you, perhaps, and then we can go questions from there.
Lovely. Yeah, we'd be very interested really in getting questions in terms of the process today, Your Worship. Look, colleagues, just to say, if we look back for the last 15 years in our LTPs, there's been a clear issue in terms of the capability and capacity of our sector to deliver in a timely manner the requirements for the three waters. And that was highlighted actually by the Office of Auditor General on numerous occasions. And that, to my mind, is not a fault issue, it's actually a system issue in terms of how we're structured and our funding tools and levers that we have actually had for well over 100 years, and they're insufficient to do the business now required to do. Add to that, of course, levels of service and delivery have increased dramatically for good reason, either for health reasons or for environmental reasons, and we now find ourselves in quite a challenging position. Also to that, of course, the country's growing, and you're growing, your beautiful city's growing as well. And again, as we all know, in infrastructure, you can't put infrastructure in at 2 or 3% a year. They're big, chunky capital items and really stress your balance sheet. So when you add all that up, and this current government or the previous coalition government in 2018, our Minister Nanaia Mahuta, I think it was at the Christchurch conference, indicated a proposal for three waters reform. And we're now worked our way through to 2021, where we now see ourselves. So there is a proposal on the table, and hopefully you've become quite familiar with it. We do acknowledge that, of course, leading up to the period we're now in, you have had enormous challenges with your day-to-day business, your 10-year plans, the adverse events that come along from time to time, and now, of course, some of the biggest reforms that I've actually ever seen in my time in local government history, which is quite a while, be it the three waters, be it resource management, be it future for local government, be it other issues that impact on your community, like health, tertiary education, etc. So that whole package, that whole suite, what we're finding now as we move through is putting an enormous amount of pressure. And as I'm about to talk to the Prime Minister straight after this meeting, and we've got three big tigers by the tail, and it is creating some significant issues. But back to three waters, the government have put a proposal on the table. We all know what they are now. They are these four water service entities. You're part of one, obviously. And again, you're going through your due diligence on the proposal. So within that proposal, there are some significant issues that LGNZ is engaged with one, our sector, but more importantly, with the government. And we're trying to seek to work our way through some of these critical issues and influence the outcome for a better result for the consumers and also for the environment. So what are they? Well, you've got this 8-week period at the moment to do your due diligence and analysis of your own situation and how that might play out in the best interest of your communities in these proposals. But we've clearly identified some critical issues that do need some serious consideration and hopefully rework. And some of those, what we've become familiar with, as an example, we are really worried about the governance model at the moment and how that might play out in terms of you as co-owners of these entities. And that's not that well known out in the public space. You as co-owners of these entities, how can you influence those entities to make sure that the service delivery and the outcomes you're seeking within your community can be addressed? So that's, in my view, probably one of the biggest issues that I'm seeing of concern, many concerns, but of concern through the sector. So that's a governance and accountability issue. The other key issue is to make sure that these entities understand your situation and are connected to your 10-year plans, are connected to your growth management strategies, and are connected to your regional economic development strategies and all those other things. Because we've seen in another big entity called Watercare in Auckland that they were actually disconnected for a considerable period of time from what I describe as the mothership or the owners of those that are accountable and respect responsible to the communities, i.e. the councils. There is also the ongoing issue and concern around privatisation. It's not a big change to go from a major corporate structure to a private structure. And so again, we're looking for every mechanism that could be put in place to make sure that that can't happen. The model being proposed by the government at the moment is not what you'd call a commercial model. And I work in both the private and public sector where you have a shareholding, you expect a dividend on a return from the asset value. This is not about that, which we support. This is about delivering services to your community, not just for today, but in a challenging environment as we move forward on a cost basis. So in other words, there is no dividend. Any surplus is returned back into the business. But the key frustrating thing we have at the moment in our GNZ is that the government seem to be silent in promoting and advising the public on their own proposal. So we have these ridiculous cartoon ads through the media and social media, which explain nothing actually about the proposal. And so we're being very strong, and I'll be reiterating it again, to the government that it is your job to explain your policy. But because I've failed in that, by default now, our sector, through your own community engagement and your own conversations and own debate, are doing, in our view, the government's job. And it's put you in an untenable situation while you're going through your own due diligence. So, and that's unfair and it's unreasonable and it shouldn't happen. So to that end, I'm actually on the Three Waters Steering Group, which is a combination of local government, DIA, Treasury, etc. And Monday, a week ago, I expressed that very forcefully that this is inappropriate. So you can't be, you as governors of Palmerston North, having this very important debate in the absence of the government explaining their own policy to the community. And what you're seeing now is that gap being filled by quite a lot of misinformation, and we're not naive to understand that there's a lot of politics around this issue as well. And so that's of key concern. And I think we need to realise just the scale of what we're talking about here. At the moment, the combined assets of Three Waters are well over $100 billion. And if your government are proposing to divide it into four, you know, that's well over 30 plus billion. And if they're looking ahead next 30 years, you can double that plus more. So in the world context, this is a big transaction. And this is also, in New Zealand context, a massive potential transaction. So our view is we need to take care about either the model being proposed or look at how we can improve it for the benefit of the consumers and the environment and the councils as we work through. And we are concerned about the timeline. We've heard it from our sector, from the far north to the deep south, that this 8 weeks, which is we're well into halfway through now, will require more time. And then can I give you an example of my view why we're supporting, not stopping the process, but making sure that councils have the time to do their due diligence. At the last Three Waters Steering Group, as an example, we considered the economic regulator. And what an economic regulator, amongst many things, is it delivers consumer protection, which is critical to wherever this Three Waters proposal may land. So at the moment, you're being asked to do due diligence and maybe engage with your community at the early phase in the absence of the complete picture, in the absence of the full design, and in the absence of some critical detail. Those are just some very high-level views. I might just now hand over to Susan to add some more value to that. And then really, Your Worship, happy to answer any questions, but just to highlight where we're at the moment, that critical phase of you doing your own due diligence, challenging, testing, arguing, maybe supporting in some cases, parts of it. That's what we're here for in the current 8 weeks.
Kia ora, thank you, Stuart, and kia ora koutou, and thank you, Mayor Grant, for having us here. I think Stuart's covered the base as well, including the, really important to remember why we're even here in the first place, which is the pressures on the system. And I think another key part really is something that we're talking about quite a lot and comes through the steering group, in which you've got Bill here, and he can bring this home soon, I think, in a really compelling way. Is that sometimes in these discussions we are looking at, we think we're comparing the current status quo to the new model, and actually what Bill will explain to you is that the status quo is not going to continue. With him and his enforcement regulation, the whole world, the whole landscape changes. And add to that the pressures that Stuart talked about. There is no status quo. And it's probably also fair to say that around the sector, most people agree there's a case for change. Not everyone, but most people agree the case for change is made. What the argument is like, how should you make change? What should that change be? And the model that's on the table is the model on the table. And if Jason Krupp were here from our place, he would say, this is a model that is fit for Aotearoa and has been tested and challenged and probed through this lengthy policy development process. It is not perfect, and there are some things that need refinement, and that's what the purpose of this 8 weeks is about. But he said other attempts to actually create the change, all sorts of attempts have been made over the years, and they never shift because of the complexity that we're all grappling with now. And so this is a model that is live and on the table. And in the work that LGNZ did with DIA, building up through the steering group process and then through the negotiation, what we did was we carved out the ability to actually deal with these tricky issues that Stuart talked about around integration and governance and local input and accountability. So those are issues that need to be resolved. The 8 weeks is a tricky period because no one's asking you to make a decision in that time. Government's not asking for a decision. That government's asking you to understand the model and see what works for you, what makes sense for you, what doesn't. It's not even, I know Stuart used rightly so the word due diligence, but it's not even the sort of due diligence in terms of the actual detail of how it will work in an operational sense, because the expectation is that when decisions are made, however they're made, there'll be a period of time to work through those pieces. So it is a tricky period, and I know, and we're getting so many questions about what happens next, and how can we, where are we going with this? And they're really fair and valid questions. The sector is telling us two things. Part of the sector is saying, could the government please just get on with it and make it mandatory? And then other parts of the sector are saying, could the government please pause it so we've got more time to understand it and work through these issues? So both of those parts of the spectrum, if you like, are wanting greater clarity on what happens next. But that's a message that we're hearing loud and clear. I do appreciate you sent through, which was really great, a whole set of questions for us to answer. Some of those are quite technical in terms of how will water services fees be set, reviewed, enforced, and some details around households' residential water supply being cut off. we will put those questions, if this is okay with you, we'll put those questions to DIA and get some written answers, and then come back to you on some of those questions. But because some of them they'll be able to answer really clearly, but if they're sort of more general strategic questions, we'd just really love to answer those now. There's probably enough from me.
Look, thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, look, you must be living and breathing this right throughout the country at the moment. Look, we had about 7 odd questions, so if those could be circulated back to us, that would be appreciated. Understand some of them are of a more technical nature, but if I've just got a couple, in the sense of, if the assets of our city in terms of waters were to be passed over to a new entity, the government has made an undertaking that no council will be worse off. So does that mean that they take the liabilities, i.e. the debt that is associated to those current assets, and any future liabilities?
Your Worship, as I understand it in the model, that is correct. So the assets are effectively vested to these entities. They're not paid for, which is, again, a key issue, but a lot of confusion around that. The combined councils within entity B, for example, or C, own those assets. You will be repaid any debt that you have with those assets. And once they are transferred, all the liability will go and be transferred to these new water entities. They, of course, will also collect the revenue, how development contributions and things like that are treated. That's detail still to be worked through. Arrangements with contractors, obviously, every council, 67 of them, have a range of service delivery through contractors. One of the key issues we have been able to secure, though, is that the staff within, council staff within these water entities will be protected. That was critical in terms of continuity, because these entities, if it plays out the way the government are proposing, actually won't be delivering the services until 1st of July 2024. And that's, in some cases, a long way away, but on a big scale of 3 waters, it's not that far away. So again, one of the key issues, just touching on that, is there is this argument that to get balance sheet separation, in other words, these entities, to get the cost off your balance sheet and the debt off your balance sheet into these entities, they do, one, need to be of scale, but also there needs to be governance separation. And this is a key issue that we're working through. In fact, there was a workshop yesterday on that very issue. And that's come through the credit rating agency, Standard & Poor's in particular. Now, we're not totally convinced that, particularly in the medium to longer term, that is an absolute requirement, because, Your Worship, it's that key issue that's of the biggest consternation that we're seeing at the moment. And it's that ability to hold these entities to account through their governors, the ability to make sure that there is strong connectivity through to your council in terms of service delivery, accountability and responsibility, etc. But to answer your first question, that's right. The debt is transferred with the assets. You'll be repaid that debt, whatever it is. And across the country, it's several $billion. And they will then pick up all the liability.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's right. In terms of that is the sticking point around that debt the separation. And the reason that that's important is because that's what creates the leverage for borrowing, which is what the entities need to do to be able to invest in the infrastructure that's needed to actually make the difference, which is why, you know, you have the scale benefits through that process. and the, you know, once decisions are made in whatever form they're made, that would be when there would be this sort of government due diligence in terms of everyone's, you know, every council's got a slightly different scenario in terms of debt and potential stranded overheads, and that's what's being meant by being resolved in terms of no worse off from the transfer.
Yeah, thank you. Understand that, and appreciate some clarity on that, because it is a sticking point for all councils, but probably more so ours as well. Look, I've got a question here from Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Susan and Stuart. I'm just wondering how you think the model could be improved to deal with the sort of issues that we're having, for example, with NZTA, with Waka Kotahi at the moment, where, you know, our local community is saying this particular piece of road, this particular junction needs attention, and they're saying, oh no, sorry, that's not a priority for us. And I fear that we're going to be in the same situation with the water entities, where, you know, if our community determines that a particular upgrade or a particular piece of work is a priority, we'll go to them and they'll say, oh no, sorry, you're not a priority, we're not doing it. So how can we improve the model to make sure that the priorities that, you know, our community and we see as being needed to be addressed can be addressed, rather than, I would say, the pretty poor model that we've got at the moment with Waka Kotahi?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I'll start the answer to that question, and Susan may wish to fill in any gaps. You're right, that Waka Kotahi model actually doesn't work, and it's failed, in my view, for well over a decade. In this proposal, and again, you know, I shouldn't be forced to explain their proposal, but we are, so we know it quite well. There are a range of techniques being proposed through formal arrangements that would be consulted on, very similar to, with your community, very similar to a statement of intents. And as we are familiar with CCOs, letters of expectation on that side. But on the other side, as I also touched on, through the economic regulation provisions, there is a lot of proposed provisions for that with regard to consumer protection and making sure that there is those levels of service which you talk about not only maintain but comply to the new regulations. Now, be it in drinking water, the regulations, as Mr. Bayfield will say, may not change, but they're going to be enforced. But in wastewater, that's really the big ticket item at the moment in terms of the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management. Those discharge arrangements are going to be harder and tougher when you go to seek a resource consent or do a new development. So again, that connectivity Susan and I were talking about before, in terms of from the entity through to making sure your needs are looked after, is one of the key points that we are working on in terms of further design over and above what's being proposed. And again, it's frustrating because you've been asked to consider all these proposals with a lack of detailed information around these, because they're still in part being designed by the government. But be rest assured, that's a critical issue that is of deep concern. And I use this case for a smaller council, let's say Clutha or Wairoa. If a pipe breaks there, who's going to come and fix it? Because they may well lose their local service agent. Will someone have to come from Gisborne or Napier, etc.? That's one of the biggest issues that we're hearing from our councils, is that service delivery issue and the connection to your 10-year plans and your growth management strategies. But Susan, you may wish to add to that.
Yeah, no, look, we're really interested in this idea, and would be interested in your ideas and what would help with that. You know, so because what you need is reassurance that your pipes will, you will have that ability to actually help direct where the work is, if you like, and or know that your particular issues can get resolved and aren't going to be put to the side. So ideas would be excellent. People are talking about things like a water advocate, someone in councils and communities that is actually an absolute go-to person, so you can make sure that there's a pathway. So ideas would be excellent. We are having a workshop, so we're teasing out ideas that are coming, but love to hear your ideas. And I guess just another point around one of the reasons, one of the supposed benefits of the scale and the investment capability that these new entities will have is that, and we heard Becca and Farrier Swear, who are the peer reviewers of the model, talk about this at one of our Zoom meetings, is that what it will do will allow much greater market power in terms of getting contractors, in terms of actually being able to ensure that where work needs to be done, it can be done in quickly. Because one of the challenges is actually having people out in some of the areas who can actually do the work. So that market power, that scale, the ability to invest and plan on a kind of network kind of basis, if you've got the right accountabilities and local input into the system, that's one of the parts of the model that they really believe will make the huge difference, not only in efficiencies, but also in effectiveness and being able to respond to issues that are on the ground as they occur.
Thanks for that. I've now got another question from Councillor Barrett.
Must be on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to Stuart and Susan for the presentation and acknowledging that the questions that have come through from council will be responded to in due course. I just wanted to, where things are at, a couple areas there. The first is around whether there's been done information that supports the case has been around, most of the information that supports the case has been around public health and around financial, and just wondering if other aspects of benefits have actually been worked through or forecast in any way. For example, the emissions that might be associated with Three Waters over the course of the foreseeable future.
That's such a good point, because I think that's part of the case for change, and whether they've been worked through in any detail, I think is a really good thing for us to take back. But that the impact on the environment, emissions, the beyond the public health and the affordability and the investment pieces, some of those broader holistic pieces are really key.
So can I, Susan, from that answer, that in terms of what we've heard from government so far, there hasn't been any mention of that?
There's been mention of it. I can't answer the question about how much deep analysis has been done on that. Probably some has, but let me get back and see if we can give you answers to that. Certainly whatever has been done hasn't been communicated as broadly as it could have been.
The only support I could possibly give you there, Councillor, is that when you, and it's a very, very good question, by the way, but when you have scale and more ability for capital input, there is a greater opportunity for carbon reduction and emission reduction and using renewables, because you have that capital capability at scale to invest in that, whereas if you had, I think there's something like 250 odd actual municipal supplies within the 67 councils, particularly the smaller councils just do not have that balance sheet capability to invest in in their capital program that would help reduce emissions.
And also the actually understanding the assets, like how they're actually performing. And Becca talked to this again at that elected member Zoom, or one of the Zooms, and that there are in different parts of the world so much investment is made in technology to actually monitor the actual performance of the assets, not just the quality of the water, but actually how they actually perform as assets in the ground, and the infrastructure performs in all those areas. So we just can't invest in that at the moment. Just the system doesn't allow it. There's not enough money in the system. So it's hard to see. You need to see that in a kind of cumulative way to be able to get the gains and the benefits.
Thank you both. That's helpful to understand where things are at there. Second and final question, if I might, Mr. Mayor, is just to understand the I guess the statements around the case being made, and that case is made for taking 67 entities through to 4, and wanting to understand why then the case hasn't been made to take 67 through to 1.
I can answer that as being like your CEO and the Three Waters Steering Group. That has been considered. The very first options that came through from the Water Industry Commission of Scotland, who are working for the government doing a lot of the analysis, was if you're really factual about it and wanted the best benefit, then one entity for New Zealand is probably the best option. But then when you put overlays of the New Zealand dynamics, including our treaty partners, that wouldn't work, including where could there be tension within the system, one wouldn't work, and a monopoly situation is that even they decided was not in the best interest of the country. They then went to consider in excess of 30 different models. Each one of them had the pros and cons. Each one of them had advantages and disadvantages over the different criteria that were laid out. And they, in their wisdom, have landed with 4, which they believe is the sweet spot in terms of best delivery for New Zealand, not for today, but more importantly for 10, 20, 30 years time. And they have sort of populations around 800,000 to 1 million-ish. Bearing in mind there is 800,000 to another million that aren't on a municipal supply, be it for drinking water or wastewater, and that's why Te Mata Arawai will have a strong focus on those private supplies.
Great, thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Susan. Look, if I could just ask if you could get those questions answered from government officials or other partners there, circulated back to us, that'd be appreciated. Look, on behalf of the city, thank you very much for giving a brief synopsis of from a local government New Zealand perspective. We appreciate that. Councillors, are there any more questions? I don't see any more hands up. And look, I'll take it that there isn't any more. So look, thank you again, Stuart, Susan. You're released to go to your next important meeting. Councillors, I'll just if we could we'll vote on receiving the presentation for information. Thank you, Sarah, putting that up on screen. That presentation by Susan Freeman-Green and Stuart Crosby from Local Government New Zealand be received. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll ask if there are any further comments or questions to that. There being none, we will now vote by voice and hand. So all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Abstained? That's passed unanimously. Thank you. Right. We now move to number 5, and I welcome another external presenter, Bill Bayford, who's the Chief Executive of Taumata Arawai, the New Zealand water regulator. Good to see you again, Bill. Thank you. I saw you online previously. You're still there?
I am, Chairman. Mr.
Right.
Mayor, thank you very much.
Good. All right. Well, look, the floor or the screen is yours, and welcome. We've got your presentation of slides. Thank you. They were circulated late yesterday, so I'll pass to you. Thank you.
Kia ora, councillors. It's good to talk to you, and it's very useful. Although it's a bit of a delay, it's very useful to listen to the presentation by Stuart and by Susan. I'm with them, as with Heather, on the steering committee for the Three Waters. But today I'm just going to talk to you about Taumata Arawai as the new water regulator, kind of where we're at, and some of the things that are driving us and some of the changes that we see coming that I think will be useful for you in consideration of what you have before you over the next weeks. The presentation that I've given you, don't hesitate to ask any questions that arise from it. But I understand, Mr. Mayor, that I've got about 10 minutes to speak and 10 minutes to answer questions, and you're nodding. So I don't intend to go through that presentation, but if you've got any queries, just don't hesitate to raise off them. You yourselves have asked Stuart and Susan some questions that I'm going to have a go at assisting to, particularly Councillor Barrett. So Taumata Arawai, we with sort of wet sails and a planning to make 1 November to go live to be the new independent regulator. COVID has, like many things, a little bit. Although in our minister, we have an absolute champion who's committed to try and get us regulatory launched as soon as possible. And so we're still targeting somewhere, I would suggest at this stage, as of emails I've received this morning, probably looking to go live towards late November. Unfortunately, if we don't make November, we'll probably flick into something like February or even March. And of course, that's really tough on our partners who are carrying the can at the moment, who are the Ministry of Health, the DHBs and the PHUs, because they've got an awful lot on with COVID. So we're certainly very appreciative of them. If I could just touch on some of the things that I think make a big difference. And so the key thing for me, you might have picked from the slides, is we're an independent Crown entity. We were set up in that way quite deliberately. So to take the function arising out of the Havelock North inquiry out of the Ministry of Health and set us up. We've got a board, an independent board chaired by Dame Karen Putazi, who was of course the chair of the Havelock North inquiry. So you can see the continuity flowing through. That board is pretty exciting, ranging from 40-year-old young engineers through to old heads who have been around the water industry for a long time. 50% Maori, 50% Pākehā, 50% female, 50% male, and probably 50% young and 50% old, but I'm getting into the older category myself now. We've got a new Maori Advisory group who have very quickly renamed themselves Te Rupu Māori, and they're providing us advice on treaty principles and on Te Mana o Te Wai, those principles, and also just giving us advice on engagement with iwi Māori around the motu, and that's incredibly important for us. We're very proud to say that one of the big changes that have come about with us as a dedicated water services regulator is that we are the first Crown entity to give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai, and we have to do that in all the functions and decisions that we make. So too does anybody who operates under our piece of legislation. So that brings Te Mana o Te Wai principles firmly and squarely into the consideration for anyone who is a water supplier or is a wastewater treater or anybody else who's operating and supporting in that sector. So big changes. We've managed in recent times to get some permanent staff. And so up until a month ago, I was running a crew of about 60 contractors and about 5 permanent staff. Most of those contractors are gone. I've got 15 left and I've got about 25 permanent staff now. I've managed to secure offices in 10 Brandon Street in Wellington, and you're welcome to come and visit anytime. And if you don't like our offices, there's excellent cafes nearby. This is, of course, when we go back into level 2, and I'm happy to have a chat with any of you. It's neat. We also have managed to choose our 4 regional team leaders and to base them. And so they're already located in their areas, one of which, of course, is Palmerston North. So those 4 regional team leads have been selected at the moment as Hamilton, Palmerston North, Christchurch and Dunedin, servicing some pretty obvious areas. Our one question mark remaining is the quite unique area that is Northland, and whether or not we'll put someone up there. And so we're all our bill, as reported back from the Select Committee, is a considerable change. It's hardly surprising when you think that the original Water Services Bill was written sort of pre-COVID and almost pre-Three Waters. So the very change you're discussing, the original Water Services Bill did not contemplate that and was not aware of that, and believed that we were going to be regulating 67 units of local government and some 5,000 small suppliers unregistered. What we now know is that we might be regulating some local government, and we might be regulating some entities, but it's very much up in the air. And you're debating the proposal today. What we also know is that we're not regulating 5,000 small suppliers. We're actually regulating closer to 75,000. That was an interesting misstep, shall we say. And that's a key factor that I'll come to in a moment in terms of how things might change for a council considering the decision. So the first thing about the bill is, as it's been reported back, is it's definitely not the status quo. And there are an awful lot of people walking around New Zealand believing that they can lift the game and meet the requirements of the bill and as it stands at the moment. And I have to say, looking at what I'm tasked with and what my organisation is tasked with, it's definitely not. And when I look at performance as recorded by Health in the last decade or 2 decades, we're a long way shy of where international expectations would have us in terms of drinking water quality, let alone wastewater treatment and wastewater quality. And so while we will use the same drinking water standards, because they are essentially World Health Organization standards transferred through to New Zealand, as they should be, I think one of the key things is that we will be seeking monitoring that of a like that has not been seen yet in New Zealand. It's interesting to note that the RFI, the request for information that went out from Three Waters to all councils, which your council took part in, is pretty much standard annual reporting in the UK, Scotland, and England, and that came as a pretty much as a big shock to a lot of district councils, and a lot of district councils really struggled with reporting on that. Whereas if you talk to the English or you talk to the Scots, that level of reporting is regarded as pretty much normal. It's also of interest to see things like testing from the taps and reporting those publicly, consumer complaint systems, all perfectly normal overseas and all written into them and expected of a water supplier. And so some big changes are apparent and some big changes in performance. For those of you who might know me, I spent the last 9.5 years in managing as CEO of Environment Canterbury, and I've been a regulator through regional councils for a long time. I'm perfectly used to the powers that are available in all the various pieces of legislation, from the Local Government Act through to the Resource Management Act. I have to tell you quietly with a slight smile on my face that I've never seen powers the like of which I've got through the Water Services Bill to take action and to drive accountability. And that is one of the key messages that I'm getting from ministers and from others, that the regime previously, where health did not take a prosecution in the last basically 20 years, that will change. And so we will see a level of monitoring, reporting and enforcement that we've not seen to date. That doesn't mean that we won't start gently. We will. We will start very slowly, and that's one of the good things that's reported back out of the bill and its report back, is that the small suppliers, which were originally required under the bill to register themselves in the first year of operation, they now have at least 3 years, and they have at least 5 years to comply. The reason I mention the small suppliers is another matter that I'm raising with all the district councils I'm talking to, and that is the considerable degree of what I would call social equity issues and social engineering issues being addressed through this bill. And that is that previously local government had a responsibility to ensure its communities had access to safe drinking water. Under the bill, as it currently stands, it goes well beyond that. And that is that if someone who is delivering small water supplies is unable to deliver safe water, they initiate a conversation with Taumata Arawai, the local authority, their customers, and the supplier. And if the conclusion from that is that they can't deliver safe water in the future, then the fallback, the supplier of last resort, becomes the district council, TLA. And so I just would like everybody to think about those places they know where somewhat dodgy water is taken and supplied to communities. And it may not be the supplier that asks that question, it could well be the consumers. And certainly it's of great deal of interest for us as we gather knowledge and we go around New Zealand to find just how many, shall we say, small supplies are, I'm going to call them dodgy. And just we expect conversation, quite some number to occur in the first year or two that we get the Water Services Act and get them operating. What I also wanted to talk about, if I could, Councillor Barrett, I was fascinated at your question. I happen to have seen the draft of the supplementary order paper that will follow the second reading to introduce further changes before the bill goes through its third reading, which is anticipated to occur over the next month. And we're aware that there's been a lot of pressure through the submissions to accelerate Taumata Arawai's role in wastewater, and I think that's likely to be given effect to. And one of the interesting things there in our consideration of the performance of a network, both of drinking water and of wastewater, is energy use and emissions. And I think that that's coming. And so I would absolutely reiterate what Susan said, in that I believe that we, and indeed the whole regime around the water sector, will have a much greater responsibility in the near future to consider the implications of climate change. I think that also comes to the siting of many of our plants and key pipelines. If you think of the assets that so many district councils have at risk in the coastal or in floodplains, and from Canterbury in particular, I think I can recall in the 9 years since I've been in Wellington for the last year, I think I've seen about 4 or 5 big water treatment plants or wastewater treatment plants shaken to pieces by earthquakes or overtopped by floods. Mr. Mayor, I suggest that I'll leave it there and open it up to your councillors' questions. I'm sure you have a number.
Yeah, look, thanks, Bill. Thank you for that overlay of Taumata Arawai and essentially what you do. Can I just ask a couple of questions before I go to my colleagues? I mean, you did touch on, this is very much a catch-up, isn't it? This Water Services Bill around regulations, testing, monitoring, reporting. Because we do get a little bit of chatter that everyone's coming down massively hard, but I suppose I'm asking the question. This is catch up really to modern day standards.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing is that, back in the 60s, by international comparison, we were pretty good. And even into the 70s. Somehow we've just lost our way in the last 3 decades. I'm old enough to maybe make a comment on that, but I won't. But you're quite right. This is just catch up. When I look at the international regimes that we could be compared with and we should be looking at, we're a big step behind, and it's not in the standards. I find it fascinating the number of councils who've put into their LTPs, a certain percentage for meeting the new drinking water standards, but they're not new. They're actually been around for quite a while. This is actually just putting in some investment to meet them, and so yeah, and that's why also I think that investment will take time, and so our regulatory regime will start relatively gently, but it will climb, and it'll climb quite steeply over the next, I would say, I'd put it at 5 to 10 years. It'll really get going.
And are other TAs engaging with you as a Crown entity? I mean, are they asking you to do what we've done, explain to our councillors and to the public your role and the new not the new standards, the existing standards?
The existing standards of the new regime. Yes, they are. Not as frequent as I might like, and I have to say, many of the ones asking are actually the more enlightened, if I can put it, in terms of the new regime. And so we're not perhaps reaching out at the moment to those who perhaps aren't realising what's coming.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Butt, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Bill, for explaining what this authority will be doing for us. My question is about those 4 regional offices. What was the criteria to select those 4 offices? Is it based on population or resources, or I couldn't understand?
Oh, no, fair enough. The resources aren't large, and we're looking at a very different regime where a drinking water supplier is faced with a duty of care. So this is one of the biggest shifts in the Water Services Bill. So the duty of care says that the water supplier will basically prove to the world that they're supplying good water to the people that are drinking it. And so a lot of the reporting will be online by themselves, making information available for others to see. We're not an old-fashioned regulator that's going to be basically driving around and visiting people. We may be even using other staff from other councils to assist us in what we call the authorising environment. So we looked at 4 locations and possibly Northland that would give us balance if our people had to cover large areas, and also look to link to another regulatory authority that we can lean on and connect to. And of course, they're also the homes of regional councils. And so we'll actually be in the building with regional councils so that we can access things like vehicles, GIS, and just have other regulators to talk to. And of course, while we're the direct regulator for drinking water, we're in partnership, and regional councils remain the frontline regulator for wastewater and for stormwater. And so that meant we were pretty much, the criteria led us down the path of looking to be housed with regional councils. And the criteria led us, where possible, not to choose the big centres. In other words, Auckland doesn't need us, and basically Wellington has us, if you follow me, in that we're based there. So what were the 4 others, and what's the question mark? And the question mark is Northland.
Oh, great. Thank you. That was helpful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Bill. I understand my video lag has been quite bad at times, so I'll try to get through this. Bill, much of what you said certainly was very welcome. The question that arises for me is around those small users, and the risk of them sort of getting forced out just through the compliance costs that might be associated. I know there's been some cases where MPI has come under criticism around small growers, organic certification, that sort of stuff, where the compliance effort has ended up being quite onerous for the for the grower in that case. So will there be measures to support small suppliers that are meeting the quality standards so they don't get forced out just through the cost or effort going into compliance?
You've come up with some good questions. One of our core parts of our bill, if you read through it, is that the regulatory strategy of Te Mata Arawai will fit the complexity, the scale and the risk of the water supplier or wastewater where they're concerned. It's written 3 or 4 times all through the Act, where we get to choose, and that's the beauty of having an independent Crown entity, is we get to choose that kind of regulatory pressure that we might apply at different times and at different players. Now, one of the other bits of the Act that I really like is that there's this thing built into it called acceptable solutions. It's taken out of the Building Act and used there. And what it says is that we can provide an acceptable solution. And so if a small player adopts an acceptable solution, so imagine a farmer or a rural community or whatever, where somebody's got an old a take, and that is run through a scheme to, who knows, 20 houses, different houses. Some of them might be Airbnb, one of them might be a cafe. But you can bolt onto the side of one of those, each of those dwellings, an endpoint treatment device, which is usually a double filter and a UV light. Now, if you do that, right, you as the supplier do not have to do anything more than service those units and check that those units are operating. And that can be done by an authorised person who is your local, hopefully your local plumber, electrician. And so, and the registration of that scheme is free. And so we won't be registering them in the first 3 years, but we will be rolling around the country, making sure that everybody understands how to keep it simple and in order. And that's one of the reasons why the Select Committee, in considering all the submissions that it had, did not change the cutoff point as to what constitutes a drinking water supplier. They kept it right down at anybody who supplies somebody else or puts water across a boundary. Now, the quid pro quo to that is we've got to keep it really simple. And certainly we are. What we are also aware of is that when you think there are 5,000 small suppliers and then you discover there are 75,000, I knew there were more than 5,000 in Canterbury before I left there a year ago. So I knew I had a headache before I came up. But when you do that and you discover there are 75,000, you realise you don't know much about them. And so we are going to take 3 years to work with them and find out a lot about them before we begin, if you like, rolling out the registration and the regulatory practice. I hope that the acceptable solution for individual houses will be adopted and will be available within the first 6 months of next year. And we can't actually do that or consult on it until we have an act. That's one of our problems. But what I also think is that we'll then pursue a series of other acceptable solutions that might look at small communities. And we're already looking at one on bores and already looking at one on springs and already looking at one on rainwater. And so we'll see a series of actions there that are targeted very definitely to reduce that level of bureaucracy.
Great, thank you, Mr.
Great. Well, look, thank you. I think have we got any more questions? Sorry, Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Bill. This is just a simple question, and I'm a pretty simple person. So is this the metering of water across the whole of New Zealand?
No, not at all. It's one of the accusations that's chucked at us. But really, to my mind, it's always been up to a water supply authority. Doesn't matter whether it's a district council or a rural board, as to whether or not they meter water. and that might or might not be a basis for charging, or it might be a basis for working out where your leaks are, or it might just be that they want to know how much you're using. And certainly all the irrigation schemes do, and all the rural water supplies do, and some district councils do. So to my mind, that's a tool that anybody can choose to utilise to make the use of water more efficient and the payment of water more efficient. And so it's a toolbox for the water supplier. Taumata Arawai has no intention of ruling that metering is required.
But it is a tool in your toolbox.
Not in our toolbox, I imagine that there would be a means by which we could do it, but it's not a tool in our toolbox. It's a tool in any water supplier's toolbox.
But you're the ruling authority across the whole of New Zealand, aren't you?
Yes, but that's what I'm saying. We won't stipulate. When you have a duty of care, it's your duty to supply safe water to your community. How you do that is for you to assess the risks, for you to assess the methods, and for you to decide what best fits your community.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill.
Okay, no other questions from councillors. Look, thank you, Bill. Thank you for giving us, again, a high-level overview of Taumata Arawai and what your remit is and where you're going in the future. I'm glad to see you've picked Palmerston North as one of your regional offices, and we look forward to welcoming you here into the city at some stage too. We've got good cafes as well. So we appreciate you taking the time today to really give us an understanding of the new water regulator and the water services bill. That's much appreciated. So councillors, we have here a recommendation. Sarah, if I could get that up on screen, please. That the presentation by Bill Bayford from Taumata Arawai be received. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any comments or questions further to that? There being none, I'll look to do a vote with voice and hands. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstained? That's carried unanimously. Look, councillors, we'll have a break for 5 minutes. We'll come back at 10:16. Thank you, Bill. We'll come back. Kia ora. We'll come back at 10:16. Grab yourself a drink or a coffee, and we'll see you back online in 5. Well, kia ora, everybody. Welcome back. We'll now continue with our council meeting. And councillors, we now go in terms of our agenda. We will now go to have a report from officers, the subject we've just discussed around Three Waters. So there has been a paper sent to you, quite a significant paper, and that's on page 139 of your papers, 139, 142, and there's also a number of different recommendations. So look, I'll ask Sandra King, who's our transportation and infrastructure manager, to speak to this. Sandra.
Good morning, councillors. I will pass this to Heather first to have a discussion with you, and Sarah to lead, and then I'll follow from there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. I just want to make a brief comment before I hand over to Sarah and to Sandra. Councillors should take this paper as read, and myself and officers are happy to answer any questions. Sarah and Sandra will just raise a few key points before we get into the questions. I'm raising a few points to clarify how this briefing relates to the guidance we've received from LGNZ and information from the government on the role of taumata arawai, and you've now had two very thorough briefings on that. LGNZ, in conjunction with Taitura, which is formerly known as Solgum, have produced a report template for briefing elected members, and this paper that you have received is in line with that guidance. We have also received legal advice from Simpson Grierson by LGNZ, and that advice is there for you. And what that advice has said is that there is not enough information on government's proposal to make a decision or to consult with the public about such a decision at this time. And as you are well aware, and was reiterated by the presentation from LGNZ, you have not been we have not been asked by government to make a decision at this stage. Sections 5 and 6 contain the specific elements relevant to Palmerston North, and the commentary is clear that at the moment we've been asked to engage in a process where every step on the road to the government's goal is not well defined, and that the implications are not yet clear as a result. However, what is clear, and has been for some time, is that our current funding streams are not sufficient to pay for our waters infrastructure, what we will need to repair, to replace, or build new, including the additional costs, which are yet to be fully realised or budgeted for, associated with the compliance requirements of the new water regulator, Taumata Arawai. The Officer of the Auditor General noted this in their report to you in July this year. And this briefing note outlines some options available to Council, but only as information. As I've said before, we're not making a decision. I've also suggested in this paper questions that you may wish me to direct to government to gain more clarity, and you have already directed some of those to LGNZ. And there is also some suggestions in here as well, recommendations on changes that you may wish to make to the reform and wish to feed back to government. I wish to assure councillors that officers are making significant headway in working through the detail. It is very complex and it's therefore resource and data heavy. We are continuing to work on a no regrets basis and will redirect some of our existing DIA money to funding staff and advisory assistance to help with this complex process. I'll hand over now to Sarah.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, councillors, and thank you also to LGNZ and Taitura for their presentations this morning. As Heather said, we are proposing to take the report as read. It gives you information on the reform process in this standard format, and the government's preferred service delivery model. But there are sections that are relevant specifically for PNCC. As LGNZ said, government's seeking that councils understand the process, but we're not at a stage of due diligence yet, which is why there have been key issues raised in the summary alongside some questions and some recommendations. LGNZ and the councillor queries have already flagged governance and strategic prioritisation as areas need more detail. And we've also flagged that staff retention is going to be really important through this process. And after transition, the need to retain some water staff in council for advocacy and for elements such as land use planning, but the details of those roles aren't understood yet. What is clear, as Heather said, is the financials of where we are at the moment in our LTP, and that the bar is being lifted for reporting, for compliance, and for making some elements of water management mandatory that didn't used to be, along with tougher penalties for non-compliance. So do nothing is not, that there isn't a status quo. So we're happy. Sandra, I don't know if you've got anything to add, but which I'll pass on to you, but we're happy to open this to questions.
Just one more thing to add, councillors, to be aware that the RFI that we completed over Christmas, New Year was a very honest approach on where we're at as a council. So that information is fed into the modelling that has come out through government's preferred. That's the only thing I wanted to add, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and also to Sarah and Sandra for the preparation of this this quite detailed report. Look, a common, before I jump to councillors, a common theme out there, and I suppose it comes back to the case for change having been made, and that status quo is no longer on the table. I think we can't underestimate that, and I just would like to get your understanding on that. We've heard it from some of our presenters, but there is a bit of dialogue out there that, you know, council should just be replacing this at their own cost. Clearly, people don't understand the status quo. We possibly could do that with status quo, but it's not on the table, is it?
Correct. If I can answer that, the status quo has lifted, the game has lifted. So now we're looking at how, as a country, as a community, we can meet these new standards. The way the government has gone about this proposed model is to look at what could be efficient and effective going forward in the 10, 20-year, 30-year process. So, you know, an example on some of the change with the compliance with the standards, they were compulsory, they're now going to be mandatory. Where I think we've highlighted in the report an example of that would be contact time with our bore takes in terms of storage, and that's something we haven't got in our LTP. So there's a whole lot of work needs to be done in the space to figure out what that cost will be.
Okay, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the information, and obviously the presentations were really useful. The question that the Mayor asked during the presentation earlier around that we would end up transferring the debt associated with Three Waters across to the new entity. What is the level of our current debt that is attributed to the Three Waters?
I'll ask Stuart McKinnon, should be online to answer that for you.
Yeah, hi. I was furiously trying to flick through my papers to remember exactly what the number was, but I think it's somewhere around $39 million. However, that's, I guess, a cautionary tale around that is that's our assessment of the debt. So you'll appreciate we run a central treasury model across all of our borrowings and across all of our activities. So our assessment's at somewhere around 39 million, but my understanding is the government is going to do a due diligence process around that and get some consistency around what they're describing as debt assigned to water, because all councils treat it quite differently. So while the number is somewhere around that, the reality might be something different when the due diligence is done.
Okay. Thank you. Just one further question. Given that we've also been told this won't be in place till July 2024, is there anything that would stop any councils from changing the structure or the way in which they repay debt on Three Waters assets between now and then?
Look, I think the answer is no. We don't know. We would, I guess, continue to behave like normal until things change.
Yeah. If I could just add to that, Sandra and Sarah made it really clear during the RFI process. We played with straight bat. We always do. We have a reputation for doing that in everything that we do. We have with our LTP as well, and we'll continue to do that. We can't speak for other councils.
Okay, thank you.
Stuart, I just note on the government's dashboard, it has our debt at 42 million. So I'm hoping it's 42 million and rather than 39. But anyway, yeah. Okay, Councillor Butt.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Heather and team for the presentation. Look, probably related to Councillor Naylor's question. If in future, after taking over, this regional authority takes over debts, is there a chance that the money they paid or the government paid us 9 million, 9.3 million, and later on about 38 million, is there a chance that they will adjust that money against these debts or liabilities?
I can answer that one if you want. It's my understanding that they're not related. So the $9 million that we've been given, we're spending now, and we will have spent by the end of this financial year. The rest of the money that's been earmarked at this stage is not really due to arrive until 2024. So they'll do those assessments, and I think it's an on top of. So we would pass over the debt and get the 32 million on top.
Great, thank you. One quick question, if you allow me, Mr. Mayor. In the same report, it is mentioned that 9.3 million is being spent on, at one point, 27 projects and the other point 25 projects. So how many projects are we doing really out of this money?
I can answer that. There are 27 individual line items. 2 of those are, one is for a project manager to run the 25 individual projects, and the other one was money allocated to the Three Waters regional work that we were doing that is now on hold due to this reform process.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the paper. 2 questions that I have. The first one's for section 4.13, which is the bottom of page 150. So in that paragraph 413, it makes reference to ownership without shareholding and without financial interests, which is quite different from, I guess, conventional definitions of ownership. So is it really ownership, and how can we respond to community questions around this?
Through the chair, do you want me to take that one? Through the chair, I think the government has been quite clear that that they will need new legislation to be able to establish this form of ownership. So the ownership is subject essentially to a legal process. The governance, you've heard back from LGNZ already that the LGNZ is questioning the governance model. What we've put in the summary and in section 5 is that there are some critical questions that we're asking about governance and how this is going to be managed to ensure local advocacy, but the detail isn't there yet. So from our perspective, I'm afraid the detail isn't there yet. I think the questions that LGNZ are taking back and the questions that you'll be asking the Chief Exec to take back will help refine this a bit more.
If I can just add to that, part of that model and not having a shareholding in terms of you put in so many assets, you get a certain percentage of the shareholding, you get a dividend, and that is what happens in some models. For instance, in Taswater, the councils are owners and they do receive a dividend. So there are different models available. Part of this is a part of the protections that are being put in place to prevent, or at least to make it less attractive for privatisation and more complex. So councils will be the owners and they will have a joint oversight with mana whenua. That group will also have a statement, produce a statement of strategic and performance expectations. So there will be a grouping that is responsible for that, and the owners are mana whenua. And then as a result, the water entity will respond to that a bit like a CCO in a statement of intent. There is also, and you'll see from that governance model, the intention of having not just Taumata Arawai, the water regulator, but also an economic water regulator and some type of consumer advocacy or consumer forum that the water entity will be required to set up. Now, the details of all those things, of course, apart from Taumata Arawai, which is more advanced, of course, are still being worked through. But it is certainly something that has been raised in terms of how do we ensure that the councils or the owners' interests are taken into consideration, but also consumers, and that is certainly very much at the front of our minds.
Great. Thank you both for those answers. The second question that I had relates to the recommendations, and specifically recommendation 9, which refers to council identifying a preferred option. And certainly at this early stage, I'm not certain whether we would get to a option or there might be a few options or sub options, etc. So could I just understand the intent around that in terms of potentially limiting us to a path where we only consult on one option?
Through the chair, what we were intending to communicate with that recommendation is that we request you to note the analysis. That analysis says that analysis essentially says that there isn't a status quo, so do nothing isn't an option, and maintain the status quo isn't really an option. But we're really asking councillors to just note that that the situation is changing. I don't think we're asking at this point in time that council make a decision, because there isn't the information to make a decision. Because we don't have the detail.
Yeah. Are there any other options? Either an opt-in or an opt-out? I'm not seeing there's other options.
You're right, Mayor Grant, that there isn't. There is only one option, unless we are to develop our own option and put that out there. But that's certainly not something that we have at the moment.
All right, thanks for those answers. I'll leave it there.
Councillor Beattie.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My question is around the Nature Calls future funding. How will that be allocated, or will we be able to claw any of that back?
Through the chair, do you mean that the funding for the next 3 years?
Yes.
At the moment, the funding for the next 3 years is predominantly within our LTP, and therefore funded through the LTP. One of the elements that we raised in the report is that again, we're at quite early stages, but the DIA has actually said there may be some assets or projects that or assets predominantly, but they've indicated that when the new transition entities are set up, which is a process that's going to start, I believe, sort of a bit later on this year, there will be an opportunity to transition some assets early. We haven't looked at the detail of this, but there may be potential to transition the BPO as a significant project early. I'm raising this simply as a high-level option at the moment. We don't have a viewpoint about whether we should or not yet, or what the detail of that will be. But it's been raised as a potential high-level option.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Okay, look, couple of final questions from me. Development contributions. As we know, they have many strands to them. Yes, infrastructure and waters is really big on those, but actually there's other things that they pay for. This is a bit of a hospital question or hospital pass. How are we going to treat those?
I can probably take this one. So I went to a seminar some time ago with the DIA that were talking about these things, and it's their intention that they would, the details aren't finalised, but the conversation at the time was that we would continue to collect development contributions on behalf of this. Sorry. However, that if there's a liability or an asset involved with what's happened historically, then we would be expected to pass that over. So if we've collected more money than we've spent on new water assets, for example, the new entity would expect to receive a cheque for that. If we've spent more money and we've got a deficit of DCs with which to pay for it, then it works the other way. And so there's quite a bit of due diligence to have happen around that. But my understanding is we would continue to collect development contributions on their behalf for the water stuff.
Sarah.
What we've recommended, though, because of the complexity of the development contributions already gathered, and the fact that development contributions are meant to pay for part of the future life of the asset, we've recommended that anything that we've already collected, it would be so complex to try and separate up past and future benefit that we would not do, just retain the money.
Okay. And look, finally, consultation with our community. And I mean, like other councillors, I've been bombarded with have a referendum now from certain ratepayers and members of the public, and rightly so. This is a massive decision and big asset, and by law we have to do. We have to talk to our community who have paid for these assets over generations, but there is an element of understanding all the facts. What's your advice on how we go through that?
I'll take that, and then Sarah might want to add to that. The legal advice is very clear that we simply do not have all the information at the moment from which to consult with our community, because much of the detail is still being worked through, and so at this stage, it is we are saying that is not viable, and that we need to wait until we have that information, and then I guess find out at the end of this process, at the end of September, the government's intention going forward. but that it's premature to have that consultation with our community at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm sensing that myself as well. There's just and hence the list of recommendations, which are very lengthy, but actually are much needed in drilling down into the devil is in the detail. So, councillors, that is exhausted the questions. Thank you to the officers for the detailed report. And look, we have some recommendations there. We have recommendations 1 to 11. I'm going to move them in total, and that is seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments, but look, I will start in saying that we're not making a firm decision on this, but we do need a lot more information. I think some of my questions have partly been answered this morning, but I think a lot of the public won't have any clue that status quo is off the table. I just received a letter from a mayor from close to us that I don't think the status quo has been totally acknowledged by our sector either. So we do have to pivot to a new delivery model and actually investment. This is about investment. So look, I'm happy to receive more information. We need to understand how our council will be, whether we stay as is or we opt in, and what that means to the financial, but also the community aspect of where these assets go. Voices of being heard, being accounted for. We heard from Stuart Crosby, our president from Local Government New Zealand, that they still have question marks themselves around the local influence. Also, privatisation, which I know can be dismissed quite easily, but we've just seen it with our sister cities in the United States, where their waters were taken out of public hands, privatised, and it took them a decade to win back and buy back. We're not quite in the privatised environment of the United States, but we do still need to keep an eye on that. I also think that it's got to be connected to what we do in terms of growth plans and just normal levels of service. If a pipe breaks, who actually is going to fix it? So all of those questions need to be answered firmly and categorically. And so these recommendations go some way to teasing out more of that detail and giving us a much more informed understanding as councillors. And then we can go to our community with quite a firm understanding of what the offers are. So I'd ask you to support these, and I'll open it up for other comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make some general comments, really. The first one is that I'm grateful for this sort of report and the way it summarises what we know at the moment, but also what we don't know and what we need to find out. And I think that having heard from LGNZ this morning, there still seems to be some areas in which the model could be improved that we might be able to influence over the next few weeks. So I think these questions that the CE has indicated should be taking back are very important ones and ones that we need answered. I mean, earlier I raised the concern around local needs and how we get those prioritised in such a big entity that covers, most of the over North Island. But when I just wanted to draw councillors' attention, if you haven't gone onto it, on the DIA site, to the slide pack for Palmerston North that was put together by the Water Industry Commission, because I think that you'll find that if you haven't seen it already, that gives a lot of useful information, but in particular the summary, which suggests under the current modelling that there's a very, very low probability, less than 1%, that Palmerston North City residents would not be better off under the proposed reform. And in fact, Palmerston North City residents are likely to be considerably better off financially. Also, that there are other issues which Councillor Barrett raised earlier about being able to respond to climate change, enhancing seismic resilience and iwi and Maori aspirations, which have not been incorporated into the current model, but which we would be more able to afford under the new model, and benefits around level of water quality, level of resiliency, and ability to respond to growth. So even with the limited information, I suppose, that we've got at the moment, and the questions that we still have about a lot of the detail, you know, broadly speaking, at this stage, it's looking like this reform would be of benefit to Palmerston North residents. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of the bigger picture here, which is that the information we've been given so far looks favourable for our residents. Thanks.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and certainly has been a very useful morning. I'm probably naturally a person that's quite skeptical of bigger is better arguments. So it's been useful just to look through, and I can say that while I maintain a healthy level of skepticism, broadly comfortable with the direction of travel, and certainly acknowledge that change is needed, not just for our city, but beyond the scope of our city. Very keen that we do get as soon as possible to the point where we can engage with the local community on this. I accept that there's yet information to be discovered, and we should bring that to hand where possible. But I'm also concerned that we need sufficient time for our community to really engage around this and to arrive at their views and to share those views with us. And so I think we'll need to be careful in terms of making sure that we have enough information, but perhaps being comfortable with there still being some unknowns at the point where we might begin community engagement on this. I'm concerned that if we wait until everything is known about the proposal, there may not be sufficient time and scope for community input. So to my view, earlier engagement is better, so that we can start to really hear from the community and increase the chances of them coming with us on this, rather than being left with a short, sharp yes/no consultation at the end of a very long process that might leave them feeling disempowered, disengaged, where there otherwise might be an opportunity to bring them with us. Thank you.
Councillors, are there any more comments? No, there seems to be none, but look, thank you to the councillors that have commented, and I do agree with all your comments. Our consultation, remembering that, of course, government can and do have the power as the sovereign to mandate this. But look, I think, as Councillor Barrett said, it'd be great to get an understanding of our community. I think our community is smart. We've seen that with other discussions that we've had with other pieces of consultation. So getting that information and knowing what we don't know quite quickly is paramount, and influencing that co-design of this new entity. There is still an opportunity to do that, and I think we've heard that from our presenters this morning. What does it mean for city ratepayers? Well, we've been told categorically that we will be better off. The snapshot, the dashboard, really does tell us that, and on the surface, it does look quite positive. But we need to get more information to test that statement, and these recommendations go a long way towards our officers being able to engage quite quickly with the Department of Internal Affairs and other entities in the government sphere to get those answers. So, councillors, I do ask you to support this, please. It's important that we make an informed decision rather than a gut or slightly political decision. So please, if you could support this, it goes a long way towards a useful another stage step in this journey. Thank you. I haven't been asked for division, so I'm going to do it with a voice and a show of hands. So we have the 11 recommendations there as your papers. I'll look to move them now. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Abstained? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Right. We're through to number 6 of our papers. So we will now have a presentation, and this is around the Lions Club of Middle Districts here in Palmerston North. And Craig Hart, one of their committee members, would like to speak to item 8 on our agenda, which is around the Victoria Esplanade mini golf course lease. Craig, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, councillors, thank you. You can hear me, Grant?
Yes, fine. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to make this further submission on matters relating to our lease. As you know, because I've made submissions before, I represent the Lions Club of Middle Districts, a 50-member club that has served Palmerston North for 50 years. I am a lone voice this morning, but I'm not other than COVID, I would not have been a lone voice. Other members would have joined me when I'd made submissions personally, but of course that's not possible today. You're also aware that after 3 years of negotiations and support from council and council staff, we were in April this year granted a resource consent to operate an 18-hole mini golf course in the Esplanade. In working with your property people, we've identified 2 major issues of very real concern in relation to the lease. While council have supported our venture, they have determined that they will not make any financial support and any financial contribution to it. The cost of the project is in excess of $330,000 plus GST. All of these funds will need to be raised in some form or other. We request a lease for 10 years, with a right of renewal for 10 years, to be able to maximise our investment for the benefit of the city. My very real concern, though, and a potential deal breaker to our project, is clause 47 of the lease. By this clause, the council can terminate the lease at any time on giving 3 months' notice. The clause specifically says that notwithstanding any other provision in the lease, the council may terminate the lease on giving 3 months' notice in writing to the tenant. Termination pursuant to this clause shall not give the tenant any right or claim whatsoever against the landlord. By this clause, council has no obligation whatsoever to reimburse us for the cost of our mini golf course. Your property team's report suggests that this clause is needed to protect you if we don't operate the mini golf course facility as council expects. As a now retired solicitor, but one who has had more than 40 years of legal property experience, I disagree with your property people on that particular issue. Clause 9.2 of the lease states that if you, the council, are not satisfied that the property is being used or is not being used sufficiently as an 18-hole mini golf course, you can terminate the lease. We accept that. If we don't operate it as a mini golf course appropriately and in accordance with the resource consent, you can terminate the lease. The resource consent specified that the facility will be manned by volunteers on fine weekends and public holidays, predominantly in the afternoons, The Lions Club has stated that staff may be available at certain times outside this should a customer request it. We want to maximise the opening times for the facility. If we don't operate it like that, then you can terminate the lease. Accept that. This is a project with a two-pronged benefit for the city. Firstly, we are providing and raising the funds to construct and operate another family-orientated activity in the city and further enhance the Esplanade as a go-to facility in the city. But secondly, any net income earned from ticket sales over and above the cost of maintaining the facility will be used for charitable purposes. We will want to maximise patronage. The more the facility is open, the more it will be used. The more it's used, the greater the funds that will be able to be distributed back into the community. Serving our community is, after all, the main purpose that we've joined a Lions Club. Clause 47, in my opinion, would entitle you to terminate the lease if you determined that you had a more preferable use for the site. The existing site is wet. It needs to be drained. We're attending to that at our cost. It requires power, Wi-Fi, toilet facilities, which will all be installed totally at our cost. Council, as you will recollect, is unable to assist us financially. If we operate the facility in accordance with the resource consent, we should be able to remain on the site for the duration of the lease. If we fail to operate the facility, as Council through the resource consent expects, then we appreciate that you must have the right to terminate the lease in accordance with clause 9.2. If we build the $330,000 facility and operate it as Council expects, then we should be able to remain there. You should not have the right to terminate the lease under clause 47 because you've had a better offer for the site. Potential financial supporters of our project have expressed concern at the possible inclusion of clause 47. If you insist that it remains in the lease, there is a very real concern that we will not be able to fund this project. You're protected by clause 9.2 and you should be protected. We accept that. But clause 47, in our view, is quite unnecessary to protect the long-term benefits of the council. We are not a fly-by-nighter organisation. We've been here for 50 years. Lions has been in New Zealand for 100 years. And this is, as I said, a two-pronged benefit for the city. A facility for you and a fundraiser for our funds will go back to people more needy than we are. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Appreciate your comments there. Look, can I just tease out, look, a couple of questions from councillors. Could I just tease out your, understand you're wanting the clause withdrawn for all the reasons you've alluded to, but the length of the lease, are you seeking a 10 by 10? Is that what it is?
Yes, we're seeking a 10 by 10. There are other, it's just simply so that we can maximise the facility. But again, throughout that term, if we don't operate it as you expect and require us to, you'll pull the plug on it, and you can do that. Throughout that 10 plus 10 year period, we'll be aware that the facility will need to have certain items of renewal, cloth will need to be repaired. Those sort of things will happen over the terms of the term of the lease and any renewal, and that in itself will be quite an expensive exercise. But we want to ensure that at all times it is of a standard that befits its location.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. Councillor Butt.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Craig, for your presentation and for all the good work you have been doing for the community. I have two questions. I guess you are asking to remove the clause 47 and you are happy with the other one, is it 9.2? Does that mean if we keep 9.2 and at some place we terminate the lease, will it make the council liable to pay all the expenditure you have done on the project?
No, not necessarily. No, there are provisions, Councillor Budd, in the lease regarding that. And if you terminate the lease, you can require us to you can take over the facility as it is. Anything movable we could take away, but otherwise you could even require us to remove the facility. The lease provides for that.
Thank you. My second question is, your current consent is, I guess, based on the available term, not 10 plus 10. If we change it to
no,
10
no,
plus 10,
no, that the original consent didn't refer to a term.
Okay, so that was my question. Would it make any difference in consent if we make it 10 plus 10?
No.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Craig. And I'm looking forward to the mini golf joining the Esplanade Scenic Railway as another volunteer organisation in the Esplanade. Just to a question, I know this wasn't the main thrust of your comments to us, but in your comments you mentioned the need to install the toilet facilities, but my understanding is there's toilet facilities within 100 metres of where the mini golf is proposed to be. So have we required you to install toilet facilities?
No, you haven't. You haven't. But we will be installing them. We're going to have people, volunteers, sometimes males, sometimes females, manning the facility. Sometimes they'll be on their own, and to be able to we want them to the toilet facilities to make us independent, so that we don't have to have dual manning.
Okay, yep, no, I understand that. In terms of the 10 plus 10 lease, is that a point of contention? I mean, we have got 10 plus 10 leases for other organisations. Are you having difficulty achieving that?
Well, it could be 10. It could 10 plus 5 plus 5, but if we only have it for 15 years, potentially then we have to amortise our investment and our efforts over the 15-year term. If we have it for 20 years, then we can amortise it over 20 years. So our effort is expended that much further. It's not just the facility that we're providing, but it's the community funds that we're going to generate as well, and we just want to preserve that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So 10 plus 10 is your ideal then, is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
cool.
you.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Craig. Craig, you mentioned the council was offering no financial support, but under your resource consent costs, are you aware there is a council fund that you can apply?
No, there is no council fund. I've been through some of the 900 employees in the council, Councillor Beattie, and there is no fund. Simon Maori has assured me there is no fund, absolutely none, and we accept that. But the only fund that might be available to assist us is a contribution towards the development contribution. The development contribution isn't going to be large. It's going to be about potentially up to $4,000, and there might be some small contribution that could be made to that. That's
okay. Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is a fund through which we did with the cricket pavilion. Through that comes through financing. performance. So I think perhaps offline, I think we should check that fund out that people may not be aware of because it hasn't been accessed for over 2 or 3 years.
Susan,
Sorry, Councillor. I think it is. It's around development contributions. I've spoken. Craig has approached me on this as well. I've gone back to officers. There is perhaps the terminology is a little bit misunderstood. I thought it was for resource consents as well. It isn't, and maybe that's something that we might want to broaden. Because the fund has not been used for a number of years. It's around development contributions, and the Cricket Association and also the Esplanade Railway were challenging us as Craig's Lions Club were around these contributions. So if I could get an officer to just check me on that.
Yeah, that's correct, Grant. It's David here.
Thank you, David. But look, Councillor Beattie, I think it is worth maybe looking at the scope of that fund because it's too tight, and obviously these organisations, need a little bit of assistance, and we just can't give it because we're bound by bureaucracy. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Craig. Just wanted to be recapped on the business plan that you've got just around your open days and hours and what your price point is. I know that's probably not related to the lease, but it's helpful for me in a wider context.
We haven't got a price point yet, but we will certainly be family friendly. We have to be and want to be. So our costs will be commensurate. Fielding have a very successful mini golf course. Inglewood are building a very successful golf course. There's one in New Plymouth, and there's various ones around the country. And we'll be guided a bit by that, but we certainly won't be setting the heights of cost because that's not where we want to sit. In terms of the hours when we're going to be open, our intention is we're going to be open really whenever we can meaningfully sell tickets. Which will be fine weekends because there's no point in being there when the weather's terrible. Fine weekends, public holidays, and what the resource consent doesn't specifically say, but we would intend to be open for at least part of most days and school holidays as well. So we will be available really whenever quotes, families, close quotes, are going to be about to use it.
Just and follow through on that line. So with your operation, is it intended that it's going to be run on a volunteer basis, or do you have a dedicated staffing resource?
Voluntary.
Okay. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Look, that's no further questions, councillors. I don't see any hands up. Right. Well, look, thank you, Craig. That's exhausted the questions. So, councillors, we now will go to Craig. You're welcome to stay online. We're going to receive a report from the officers in a moment. So, councillors, before we get to that, we should move the presentation from Craig Hart of the Lions Club of Middle Districts be received. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. There are no comments. We have a report coming from the officers. All right, we'll do this with a show of hands again. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstained? And that is passed unanimously. Right, we now will move to minutes. It's on page 13 of your papers. That's confirming, if I just have it up on screen, please, Sarah. It's around confirmation of minutes of the 25th of August 2021 meeting be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'll look to move those and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any matters arising. There being none, we'll look to move that again with a voice and show of hands. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstained? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Right. We will now move to, again with number 8, the Victoria Esplanade Mini Golf Course lease proposal. And we have a paper here from our property division, Bryce Hosking, and with infrastructure, Sarah Sinclair. Bryce, I'll take the paper as being read. Are there any summaries you'd like to make before we get into any questions?
No, happy to take it as read, and I think Mr. Hart covered the issue quite well.
Great. All right. I just have one question, Bryce, and look, there would be no issue with us extending this to a 10 by 10, and because there's plenty of precedent been set by others that have got similar type leases where they've made quite heavy infrastructure investments. Bearing in mind, this is not just a building lease. This is putting some stuff on the ground.
Yeah, correct. No issue at all.
Okay.
So our standard practice is just 5 + 5. So when that varies, we come to council for approval.
Totally understand. Thank you. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Bryce. Just a quick question. Obviously, as you've just said, it's come to council because it's outside of our standard practice, but you've also given us examples where this has happened in the past. I'm wondering whether, in terms of the process of lease negotiations and the delegation for those to be signed off, do we need to review our standard lease agreement to have more flexibility, or is it one of those things where it's not that common, so what we've currently got generally is fit for purpose?
Look, it's a standard lease template, and on the whole, it is relatively fit for purpose. You're correct that we do have some precedent where we've varied from that, but I guess in context to all of the leases that we have in this sort of recreational type format, 15 is a small number.
Okay, and in terms of other parties that we are negotiating lease agreements with, are they aware that they can request something outside of the terms that fit within a standard agreement? As we've heard from Craig, who's requested variable terms, are other groups aware of that through the process, or is it something that if they kind of challenge the status quo, that's when we go down that path?
Probably a case-by-case basis is probably the my simplest answer to that. I mean, they are aware. We do have these kind of conversations with them, and we just sort of make clear around the process as part of negotiations. Probably when there is going to be a significant investment from the tenant party, that's the most common time that this exact sort of matter gets raised.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Similarly to the questions asked by the Deputy Mayor, how do we decide sort of which organisations we would change, I guess, the rules for, and how does that sort of compare with things like the Esplanade Cafe, the Scouts, or even charities operating out of Hancock House? How does our current standards and policy fit with those organisations as opposed to this one?
Good question. So it does vary depending on where they are. So for instance, if they're on a reserve, then there's considerable restrictions through the Reserves Act where that can influence us as well. Whereas something like, say, Hancock House, that's not on a reserve, and we potentially have a little bit more freedom there. That being said, the current sort of policy that we're operating under is currently being reviewed, and I understand it will be coming to council as part of a greater piece of work in the next couple of months. So we do have a degree of flexibility. How do we make a decision? Well, really, that comes through negotiations. And when we are looking to vary, then ultimately that is the decision of council when we come up to yourselves like we are in this instance. On balance, really in many ways, especially around the termination clause, be a risk-based decision for yourselves. That standard termination clause is in there, and it does give council a degree of added protection. That being said, as I did articulate in the report, for a breach of lease, there is still protection in that instance anyway. So probably the easiest way to answer that is a case-by-case basis, depending on the situation.
Right. And I guess my final question is, how do we decide on how much, how much the lease actually costs? Because with this one here, it's $150 a year. So that over 20 years would be something around $3,000 for 20 years of a lease. How do we come up with those figures?
So that is dictated firmly through the current policy, and it depends on whether they're leasing a building, whether they're just land, and so that's actually dictated by our current policy.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I apologise if this question has been partially answered, but there was actually a little bit of lag in my reception here. But Bryce, could you just give us some commentary? Clause 9.2, does that provide us with sufficient ability to terminate the lease if we did not have clause 47 in place?
It does in the instance that there was a breach of lease, i.e. not paying rental, I guess breaking the law, whatever it may be along those sort of lines. It would not give council the ability to terminate a lease if we were unhappy with the way it was being run, for instance, or we had a change of strategic direction or something like that. It does not cover that, but it does only for breaching these conditions.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I could just follow up on that. So, say for example, if the venture became unviable and it wasn't drawing perhaps people into the Esplanade as we would have liked, would that be excluded from 9.2?
Yes, it would. That's not really a termination offence. It's not really a breach of lease. I think it's also important to note here that the lease makes it sound like we just terminate these. Usually, there is quite a few sort of conversations that are had around this. Should there be an instance where the Lions felt the venture was no longer viable, then that would come through a series of conversations with my team around the most appropriate action there, and we may choose to release them from their lease conditions accordingly through negotiation. And those decisions, depending on the situation, if we were looking to acquire the asset in that situation, then that decision would come back to council.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bryce, thank you. Do you see much difference in the proposal of a 10 plus 10 versus a 10 plus 5 plus 5? Do you have a particular view? Any thoughts on that? Or do you see that being similar? Well, it is similar, but what's the difference in your view?
Yeah, it is quite similar. So I guess the most important thing to note is that's the tenant's right of renewal. So if they had a 10 plus 5 plus 5, all that means is in the second term, after 5 years, they would have the right to renew for another 5 years. If we gave them a 10 plus 10, then really after 10 years, they have that ability to make that decision. Council doesn't actually have that decision until the end of all of the renewal terms have been activated. So in this case, it would be 20 years' time. In both cases, actually, if it was 10 plus 5 plus 5, It really comes down to the trade-off between flexibility from the Lions' point of view versus security.
Second question I got, thank you for that one, is just around defining the activity expectations. If we're going to enter into a lease, I was a little bit, it seemed quite vague still, the amount of number of days per year we might expect the activity to be available to the community around the number of school holidays and whatnot. How much shape are we going to put into that so we can actually have some measure if they are going to meet the expectations or meeting them in future years? Like I just don't want to enter into this having it so loose that if we have a disagreement on how it's performing or how widely it's open, I just don't want those type of issues eventuating. So how defined are we looking to get the activity expectations?
I would suggest if council was looking to be very, very clear on those expectations, that might sit better in some kind of MOU type arrangement as opposed to in the lease. The lease document provides for the broad sort of activity, and that would sort of be mini golf activities, for instance. But yeah, any kind of sort of expectations around running probably sits better in a MOU type document.
If I was to push to say that I think that's quite fundamental, even before we even go into signing a lease, like this has been proposed some time, for at least 12 months now, as far as my recollection, that we haven't actually got to a point of writing an MOU defining what the number of days, minimum number of days per year, and even what the price parameter points could be. Like they seem quite fundamental to me to be giving a lease in a prime community space over this period of time. Like, what would be the steps to action there? Obviously, we can make a recommendation today, but is that not usual to have some of that expectation in place?
Look, again, it's probably a case-by-case basis. It is relatively operational matter. We can take this from here, and through negotiations with the Lions, we can determine an MOU, and basically both documents could be signed in unison, and we'll make sure that both documents refer to each other, so no one can be read in isolation, is typically how we would do this. Is it standard practice with all of our recreational leases to do an MOU? Well, no, it isn't. And the actual mini golf course, this was discussed and it was included in the master plan for the Esplanade as well. So it's not a completely left field activity or anything like that. So it has been covered quite well. My suggestion would just be my team can take an instruction from here to enter into that MOU document and do both.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Bryce, I've got 3 more questions. I'll leave mine possibly to comments, but Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Bryce. My question was around precedent in terms of other organizations that have invested capital in sort of public facilities on reserve land. So things like building scout halls. I think we just had a recent case in Ashurst where that's come through. Obviously, we've got a scenic railway that has some assets on the ground, things like golf courses, tennis clubs, etc. So in those cases, with regards clause 47, what's been our approach in those cases?
So we do have a couple of instances which the report details when we have removed the termination clause. Just get the clause for you. So clause 3.8 in the report has highlighted a couple of instances where we have removed that clause. And so we have done it in the past. for all of these organisations, again, it comes down to a case-by-case basis. In some instances, the tenant does not mind. In some cases, the activity might be included in a master plan, for instance. So there really is different situations for different decisions in this space. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. If the tenant is investing significant capital into that, then I think it's very fair and reasonable for them to propose this. But ultimately, that decision of whether council is happy for that to be removed.
Thank you. So then, Bryce, what we could take from 3.8 in your answer then is that not having an early termination clause is more the exception than it is the rule in terms of our current practice.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bryce, I can think of probably 3 other leases we have in the Esplanade. How do they fund up? We know pretty well about the coffee bar area, but what about the croquet and the mini golf? The croquet and the mini the train area. What sort of leases do we have with those two?
Well, I don't have the leases immediately at hand, but they are, as I understand, more in line with our standard sort of leasing arrangement. The cafeteria or the cafe there is different, which previous meetings. But in terms of the croquet, for instance, that's definitely a standard lease, as is things like the United Cricket Club and like that. So we've got a few other examples where they've all been standard lease.
So they're all 5x5, are they?
I couldn't say that definitively without them in front of me, but I believe so.
If we could have that circulated, what the other leases are, so we can compare this with the mini golf, please.
Can do.
I just see Kathy Diva Todd pop up. Kathy, did you want to comment on this subject?
Yes, through the chair. The reason we have a number of leases with different terms and different times is that some of the leases were very old leases that haven't yet gone through council policy. So as a lease is coming to an end or being renewed, it has been brought into the line with the policy of 5+5. But many of the leases on recreational land were 21-year leases, peppercorn leases, and some of those are still old leases that you see in the table.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just draw councillors' attention to 2.5 in the report, which talks about the longer leases. But my question is, Bryce, do we have any other leases with the Lions Club?
Yes, we do.
So, do you know what they are offhand?
I don't have a full list of all of the leases, but yes, we have had lease arrangements with the Lions.
Okay, and so has there been any need to terminate any of those leases early?
Not in my time at council.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Councillor Dennison, you've popped up again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had 2 other questions which I hadn't captured before, which were just for clarity. I understood there was talk about a toilet. Is that part of this proposal, Bryce, or is that just a possible future provision?
So this report is solely focused on the land lease. The building or any of the development that occurs on there would all be handled through the resource consent process.
Okay, and the second point was around the shop. I know that we had prior talking around them having a shop available. Is that being further developed, or is that not intended now?
Well, I might hand over to Kathy to comment on the overall provision of that for the Esplanade.
Thank you. Through the chair. So we have completed conducting the survey of hospitality. The Lions Club made a submission to that, requesting that they could sell goods at the site. There will be a report coming back to council, but we see the hospitality component is outside this because this is a land lease. It's not a lease of an existing facility, so it's not really a matter to be considered now, but we will consider that in the context of the hospitality review and make a recommendation to council on that matter.
Okay, thank you for clarifying both those points and where they sit.
All right, thank you, councillors. Right, thank you, Bryce. Thanks for your efforts and your team's efforts, and thank you, Kathy, for popping into the conversation with your lovely background there and commenting. We appreciate that. So, look, councillors, we have recommendations to us. I'm going to move number 1A, which has approving the extended lease term of 10 plus 10. So if I could just change that, please. +10 years for the Lions Club of Middle Districts Incorporated to enable the development of the 18-hole mini golf course within the play zone of the Victoria Esplanade and remove the early termination clause within the lease. I don't think I need to get specific about the early termination clause unless the officers would like me to. Could I just get an understanding, Bryce, do you need that do you need that specifically pointed out, or are you fine with what's there?
Happy with the recommendation, possibly in terms of wording around the 10 plus 10. It could just be altered to read the extended lease term of 10 years plus a right of renewal of 10 years.
Okay, thank you. Right. Okay, that's been seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, I'll just make a few quick comments to it. Look, this is slightly different to a building lease for a community organisation. They're investing 300,000 plus of infrastructure for our community, remembering that the city is not giving a cent to it. It's an entity like the cafe or the holiday park. So I think that we've got to treat that like we've treated others. And there is precedent around infrastructure-bound community leases, and they're listed in the report, so I'm not going to go through those. But remember, it is a community organisation, a not-for-profit. It's not a cafe lease or a accommodation holiday park type lease, where I think we would be putting a little bit more rigour around the lease. The 10 plus the right of renewals is absolutely understood, and I think the club has made its case well. Removing the early termination clause, I think, goes back to some of those more commercial type aspects. If a Lions Club goes rogue on us, seriously, we will have to kick them out. But the thoughts of that happening are very, very low. Look, operationally, I think the MOU with them around hours, that's operational level. I don't know if we put the hours of the scenic railway train in our lease or when the Scout Hall should be open. I think that really is at an operational level. Yes, it has some community interest, but we're dealing with the Lions Club of Middle Districts. This is not their first rodeo. So please, I think they've got 50 plus years of experience. Let's not dive into the detail. This is a land lease. They have had a great community impact on us. They've got a good reputation and they absolutely want to maximise it. So what are the positives and negatives? The cons are the Lions walk away. It's too hard, and they may still do that, but I don't think they will. because I've been here. They like to do things for our city and for our wider community. The strategic intent of council, maybe it holds us to that next 20 years, but remember this fits within our overall strategy, our master plan, and overall it's a family-friendly facility. It should be still fit for purpose in 20 years' time. That the Lions Club, the user, goes rogue and we have to kick them out. But as I said earlier, I think that the positives here significantly outweigh the negatives. So I think we need to get out of the way a little bit and let the Lions Club raise their 300,000 plus, deal with our officers professionally. We're dealing with an organised 50-year plus organisation which has the city and community at heart. Let's give them a chance. So please, I'd hope that you would be positive and supporting this recommendation. Right, I think I've opened up the Pandora's box. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I was first in the queue because I was going to propose exactly what you've proposed. So I fully support your moving option A. For me, this comes down to a relationship of trust with not just between council and the Lions Club, but between the community and the Lions Club. And at some point, we have to acknowledge that the Lions Club has been working for the good of the community for 50 years. And this mini golf, not only will it provide a facility for families to come and use in the Esplanade, but any income that's generated will go back into the community. So I think that the Lions Club here are offering us an enhanced facility for our jewel in the crown of a park, and they're also offering return to the community for any money that they make over and above the running costs of keeping it going. So to my mind, there's a lot on offer here, and we as a council aren't really offering a whole lot back. Yes, we're giving them a concessionary rent, but the full cost of developing it is on them. And so I see the extended lease option and the removal of the early termination clause as just small gestures of goodwill from us back to the Lions Club for all that they're doing for the city. And so I don't think that this is an excessive amount of risk for us to take. I think, as the Mayor made me laugh with his Lions Club going rogue, but I mean, I think as Craig himself mentioned, you know, the Lions Club has been around for 50 years. There's got to be some value in having a good reputation and good relationship with the community, and we need to acknowledge that. So I think staff have brought this to us obviously because it doesn't fit within our normal policy, but it's entirely down to us if we want to allow this. I do think that this is one of those situations where we need to acknowledge that the good for the community that's been done here deserves a little something, a little bit of reciprocity from us. And so that's why I think we should go with option A. Cheers.
Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I just took my hand down because I completely agree with the comments made by yourself and Councillor Johnson, and I don't have anything further to add.
Sorry, just struggling with the technology there. I thought you were hidden somewhere. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm completely happy with the 10 plus 10. I think that's very appropriate. The point you made about the MOU being very operational, I think that's true. But yet I just want to flag, I guess, my concern that we haven't had that conversation around what some of the basic expectations are. I know a lot of it's just done on goodwill, and I think that still adds a little bit of risk to us from a city point of view in moving down this track without actually understanding what those basic expectations are. Because if there is any disagreement, as mentioned in the report, these types of issues are very difficult to address down the track if it's not going well. I had actually preferred option B, which actually left the termination clause in the lease. I think the popularity of mini putt has shown over the course of its life that it does peak and trough over time, and I'm not so sure what the interest for it would be in 10 years' time, and just how the operation might go. I want to move into it positively, but I do have that as a question mark. When I look at other issues where we've signed on leases without expectation around days of use, for example, on the railway land, we've got big poles up for high ropes course. I've never seen it open, and so that's, I don't want to create a similar situation in the Esplanade where families are going down to look to go on a lovely day, but they haven't got a volunteer in place for those time and hours, and for having people go in and actually being disappointed they can't action their activity. So, and having that termination clause is just a little lever just to kind of make sure that it's always got a game on type of approach from the organisation. And it's nothing against the Lions Middle Districts Club. I'd have the same view for any other party that we're entering into. Because the Esplanade is such a prime space, I want to eliminate the risk around that, I guess. So, but understand you'll have enough support to get it through. I'm not opposed to it. I just prefer to have the termination clause. That would be why I oppose. If I probably would flag now, if it was to lapse, I would move option B as the alternative. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Few councillors jumping in and out, so I'll go to Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm definitely for option one. I think that the Lions Club are going to have a job ahead of them in terms of raising the 300,000. They did come to us in terms of the long-term plan to try and raise some funds through us. So good luck to them in terms of raising that fund. I think the Esplanade is a great place to put this, but and so that's why I do agree with this in terms of putting it in the Esplanade. They have got other options though, in terms of the city. There are other places to put this, so we do need to secure this in terms of this lease. So Craig, thanks for bringing this to our attention, and I hope that we can secure this today so that we can lock this in place. But there are other options in the city. So thanks, Craig, for bringing this to our attention, and we do want to lock this in place. So thank you, Craig, for all the hard work you are doing. Hope everybody will vote for it. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and totally agree with your comments and support the recommendation. I just want to give a heads up, and I won't do it today because of time, that I will bring a notice of motion to change the development contributions, because this that policy which we brought in many years ago for the Cricket Association and for the railway, that the intention was always that the council, it could be used for council fees waiver as well as resource. So I'd like to see that would be some way that we could help the Lions organisation. So I'll bring that to council next time round. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am going to support this one. I fully support the work that the Lions do. I think they're doing an amazing job in the community, and I think as a council we should be supporting that. I also really value this conversation that we've been having around this lease, because it enables us to ask the questions that need to be asked. And I'm a little sad that we're not able to do that, I guess, a bit more frequently, because if we're looking at a 10 by 10, you know, the next time we have this conversation will be in 10 years' time, I suppose. And I feel like I'm quite happy with, in general terms, I'm quite happy with the shorter timeframes to be able to have those discussions. But in terms of this particular lease, I'm happy to support the Lions. I do want to see a bit more transparency, though, around how we decide which organisations get, you know, different circumstances and different changes to different leases. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that report later on in the year or in the term that looks at the different support that we give all the different organizations that we support and the different leases. And, because actually providing that cheaper lease and for that longer period of time is a benefit that we are providing to this organization. And I think we need to start being upfront with that and acknowledging that as well. So yeah, those are my thoughts, but I will be supporting this one this time.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will fully support number one. We're going to remember we're dealing with a service club here, which is made up of people who wish to serve our community. And when you look at the history of what service clubs have done in Palmerston North, things like Memorial Park, they haven't failed us. They've never let us down. And the service clubs are answerable to a national body. We're not dealing just with one small group. We're dealing with a group that goes through New Zealand. And I think we should be supporting them 110% as much as we can. Any profits will go back into the community. They're not a profit-making organisation. Every last cent will go back into the community. Why are we even spending time arguing over it? To me, it's a no-brainer. We should just go straight ahead and do it. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, thank you. I don't think I need the right of reply, so I haven't asked. Nobody's asked for a division, so we'll do this on a show of hands. So with the recommendation that's there, we will do it now with a show of a voice and hands. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against?
No.
Thank you. Abstain? Okay, so that is passed 14-1.
Grant, can I ask that my vote in against be recorded, please?
Yes, I'm just going to do that as well. Thank you.
I thought Councillor Barrett voted against, or was that just a lag on his video?
Happy to confirm that I voted in favour.
Yeah, it's just your video lagging. Thanks.
Okay. All right, councillors. Now, we'll have a break for 15 minutes. We're going to take a later lunch break because we want to get through the SOIs and then have a break. But let's have 15 minutes and 12:05 back online, please. Great. Thank you.
you hear me?
Back to our council meeting today for Palmerston North City Council. Look, councillors, we'll now move to our statement of intents with our CCOs. So first up we have on our agenda is number 9, which is around the Globe Theatre Trust, statement of intent for 2021-24. There's a paper there at page 31 of your council agenda. It's presented from Hannah White as governance manager. I'm going to take it as being read, councillors, and we have online also, and welcome to Mr. Jerry Keating, who's available to answer any questions. And just want to acknowledge firstly the Globe Theatre, to Chair John Adams, and the Trust Board on the work you do for our community, especially in that community theatre engagement and obviously running the Globe facility. So, councillors, I'll open it up for any questions. Give me a moment. And Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I just had a question about 2.4 in the report, table 1, comparison of council comments with the Globe's final statement of intent. So there were a number of council comments made on the draft that either haven't been dealt with or are just mentioned in the foreword. And I just wondered either if we could have a staff comment or if the Globe could comment why they haven't acted on the council comments on the draft statement of intent.
Well, I'll get an officer first to reply, and then if need be, we'll go to Jerry. So we'll go to you in first instance, Hannah.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. As noted in the report, many of these items are either waiting on work with officers or, as you say, I've mentioned in the foreword. So we're comfortable that those are progressing, but Jerry may wish to give you a bit more detail on that.
Jerry.
Oh, g'day guys, thank you very much. And I just wanted to acknowledge, because I was reading through obviously the statement of intent over the last couple of weeks, and it felt really strange. So if it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor, I just want to acknowledge Maxine Dale, who unfortunately passed away recently and has been a member of the Globe Theatre Trust since, I believe, September 2007. And of course, a member of the Manawatu Theatre Society since, I don't know, 1886 or something like that. It just felt really strange when I was reading through the report and seeing her name pop up a few times. So I just thought I'd just like to mention that. In response to Councillor Johnson, yeah, we have a whole load of, I guess, targets and KPIs that we work with, and it is just an ongoing process to kind of formalize, maybe tidy some of them up, and meet with council officers, and it's which is why we now have a date of March 2022 to have this finished. So it is just a work in progress at the moment.
Okay, can I just have a follow-up on that, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, sure.
So what you're saying is that won't be complete until March 2022?
Well, it'll be included in our next statement of intent, which will be for these 3 years, 2022 to 2025. Council officers are happy with this, so we've kind of taken it as okay.
Okay, so but I think council has to be happy with it, Jerry, rather than just the council officers. I'm just wondering, because effectively we're losing a year here, aren't we? And you're not responding to those comments?
Well, in the report that came to us after our draft statement of intent, we were asked to make a few changes, which we actually did put into our final statement of intent. It is contained in our forward, and it's in relation to, working with council on the refurbishment of the Globe One Theatre, to develop new performance measures, to actively explore a one-stop shop, bringing the ticket function under one umbrella, and to develop the economic impact reporting for regional and national significant events. So it is, I guess, an ongoing process that we will hopefully meet and get organised in time with the council officers.
So there were a number of council comments made.
Hello.
I don't know. Somehow seems to be a bit of echoing going on. Forward.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Hannah. Can we just sort out that technical issue? That was a previous question that we just heard Lorna repeating, and she didn't repeat it. It just came over as a taping.
I think we've dealt with the issue.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well, I'll leave it at that for comment. Thank you.
Okay. Councillors, no more questions of the Globe? All right. Okay, we've got a recommendation there. Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate you coming in. Sorry to make you wait a little while, but that's the nature of online meetings. Like in-person meetings, sometimes they can go on a little while. But look, councillors, we have the recommendation. If I could get that up, please, Sarah. That council agree the SOI or Statement of Intent 2021 to 24 submitted by the Globe Theatre Trust as attached in Appendix 1 of the report titled Globe Theatre Trust Final Statement of Intent 2021-24. Look, I'll move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and I'll open it up for any comments, but I too just would like to acknowledge the sad passing of Maxine Dale, who'd been the chair for as long as I can remember, actually, as being mayor, and the sterling work she did in taking over the reins from Stephen Fisher. And look, the great work that the trust is doing and running that theatre in quite difficult times, to be fair, and probably a few more challenging ones to come. So I'll open it up for questions, for comments. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yes, to echo your comments and Jerry's comments about the sad passing of Maxine, she will be hugely missed in the world of the Globe Theatre, clearly, but also in our wider theatre community. Her contribution was significant, probably more in a personal and behind the scenes way. She was a real supporter of people, and was always there to offer advice and to share her wisdom. And I certainly was on the receiving end of that sometimes and very much appreciated it. So thank you, Jerry, for raising that with us today. I just wanted to comment also as we look at this statement of intent that, and I'll probably end up saying this a few times today, but that we're really dealing in a significant period of uncertainty. And we have our CCOs planning with the best of intentions, but as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, best of intentions can go out of the window at a moment's notice. And I wanted to say a specific thank you today to the Globe, and probably just to you really, Jerry, because I see the scrambling that's going on to try and get performances rescheduled to keep on track to meet the targets that you have set. And I think we are all appreciative of the work that goes on in the background to do that, and supportive of the inevitable impact that will have on the targets that you've set and the reporting that goes from this statement of intent. So thank you very much for the work that you do, and very best wishes for a successful delivery of this statement of intent.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, yeah, just following on from my questions around the lack of dealing, I guess, with the council comments on the draft statement of intent, I think it's just a little bit too relaxed an approach for my liking. So the whole point of this process is that when the draft comes before us and we make comment on it, that the organisation then goes away and deals with it in the final statement of intent. And so just to have it, oh well, we've mentioned it in the forward and we'll do it for next year, doesn't really cut it with me. I think it's just a bit too casual an approach, so I'm not very happy with that.
Okay, councillors, we have the recommendation there. Again, ask for your support on it. It is difficult times for venues that have seats and a number of them. So yeah, look, all the best to the Globe in the coming months, and our community and city will be behind you. So councillors, just like you to please support this SOI, and I'll do that on a voice and show of hands. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against?
Against.
And abstain? Okay, that is passed 14-1. And if I could just ask the administrator there just to make sure we get that all correctly documented, please. All right. We now move to number 10 on our order paper, which is a statement of intent for the Regent Theatre Trust. And again, page 53 of your documents. Like to acknowledge Chair David Lee, and thank you, David, for coming online, along with the manager, David Walsh. I'm sorry that we've had you sitting in the lobby, the online lobby, but welcome, and do want to acknowledge the Trust Board and the work that the Theatre Trust and staff do. And obviously the Regent Theatre is New Zealand's best performing arts venue, and we do want to keep that, and do acknowledge that there has been some difficult times, and again some possibly difficult times ahead too. But look, we'll take the report as being read. It's from Hannah, our governance manager, page 53, and I'll open it up for any questions. Well, I'll ask one. David, if you're online, or both Davids, your just very quickly, your take on level 2. If we get to level 2, will you be looking at doing some innovative stuff around getting the theatre open?
David Walsh, are you there? Can you answer that, because you're working on it at the moment? No response from David?
He was online. Sorry, David.
That's fine. No, look, you know, this has been a kick in the butt for us, the second, and in particularly for Palmerston North with poor old Act 3 Productions. It's going to really stretch them, and so we're doing everything we can to help accommodate them. However, the best that we can do, and the best that they can do at this stage, and I'm not sure whether it's public or not, but I guess it is public now. The fact that we're trying to reschedule We Will Rock You, but it won't be until end of January, or middle to end of January. But we're moving all sorts of things around to try and do that. So we're trying to accommodate where we're at. You know, just a general comment. We were sitting very happily with where we were at up until this second COVID strike. We'd even made a very small profit last year, and so we were very comfortable with what was happening. But this has changed the ballpark again, and so I guess we're heads up to council that if everything doesn't go well, we might be looking to you for a bit more help. We're confident that we can get through it. Our big problem is international acts. They're just not there. We've got bookings forward, sure, but most of them are community bookings, which is great, which is what we're there for, but they don't make us any money, and they don't help us pay the bills. So just a heads up. I think we'll be okay, but who knows? Council do prefer warning signals, and so I guess that's a warning signal, folks, that we might be not cap in hand, but we might be needing to talk to you. The other thing that if I can mention, Grant, is just the work on the debacle of Ticket Rocket. We're complying with council requirements there as far as the insurance is concerned, but again, just a heads up, we are at the moment being threatened by one production company. We had a 5-day notice letter about 10 days ago that they were going to take us to court. We have engaged legal counsel to handle that for us at this stage. So again, just a heads up, hopefully it's not going to come to anything, and hopefully it won't send us broke, but the Ticket Rocket thing could see our asset base decline dramatically, and again, heads up, we might be coming to you.
All right, thank you, David. Look, we're aware of both of those situations, and yeah, we've been in regular contact with the insurers around the Ticket Rocket issue is multiple entities right around the country across theatre and sports and other venues, so including ourselves with other venues here in the city. So look, I've got another question there, a couple of questions. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, David. I just wanted to say great show with We Will Rock You, but my question's around your R&M for the theatre. I know before we went into the lockdown, you had some programs to do R&M. Where are they sitting at the moment, David?
They're sitting, we normally have a very quiet period over January, end of December, January, February, and so most of our R&M is scheduled for that time. However, that's the time that we're going to now try and bring Act 3 and We Will Rock You back in. So some of that will be delayed. Nothing that is absolutely essential or is in the health and safety realm will be delayed. So it's a bit like the globe. We're a work in progress there.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, David, for joining us today. I wanted just to ask about the collaboration with other CCOs. So this turn's been lots of your reports. Collaboration with other CCOs to explore a one-stop front-of-house booking operation and bringing ticketing functions under one umbrella. Are you able to give us a sense of the likely length of time that piece of work will take?
Maybe not in our lifetime, Rachel, unfortunately. There are many complicated issues involved here, and rest assured we are trying to address them. We are endeavouring to address them, and it's our desire to address them, but a lot of complications. We are moving forward on the theatre booking from a production side, so not selling the seats but selling the theatres to our production companies. We are moving forward slightly on that, I believe, and there's a little bit of progress, but the rest is again a work in progress. It's a desire, we accept that would be a great thing, but there are a lot of complications that I think the average Joe Blow won't be able to even comprehend, let alone us comprehend. So moving forward, but very slowly, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, David, and best wishes. And I hope it is in my lifetime. That's quite a depressing thought, but best wishes with that.
So do I.
All right. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, David. And again, all the best wishes from us. And thank you for the no surprises heads up. Hopefully I don't receive those calls. Right. We've got a recommendation there to council. And if I could get that up, please, Sarah. Thank you.
Grant, if I could just interrupt for a moment and Jerry reminding us of Maxine has reminded me of Pat Snoxall as well, and so I guess this is a good time just to mention and to officially recognise in the historical documents, I guess, the work that Pat put in to the Regent on Broadway in particular, and into theatre and throughout the whole of the region.
Yeah,
acknowledge his passing.
Thank you. Sarah, if we could get that back up on screen, please. All right, that the Regent Theatre Trust, their final SOI 2021-24, that Council agrees the Statement of Intent 2021 to 2024, submitted by the Theatre Trust Board, attached as Appendix 1 of the report titled The Regent Theatre Trust Final Statement of Intent 2021 to 2024. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And councillors, yes, I've heed the caution there, but it's been great that the Regent has got itself into a good position from a standing start over the past year. Look, the theatre's survived so well over the time here in the city, so I'm sure it will continue to go from strength to strength. But there is some caution in those headwinds coming at us. Just want to acknowledge again the Trust Board, but also Pat Snoxall, who of course was the patron, or one of the patrons of the theatre, and his sad passing, but also celebrating the contribution that he made to our city, especially in the theatre sector. So look, I hope you support this. I'll open it up for any other comments. There being none, we'll do it again with a show of hands and voice. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstained? That is passed unanimously. Thank you. Okay, councillors, we move through to number 11, which is Te Manawa Trust Board and their statement of intent for 2021-24. And we're joined here, and I welcome online the Chair, John Fulk, and also Trustee Jeff Jameson. And also in terms of the staff, we have the CE, Andy Lowe, and I believe Catherine Parsons as well. So welcome, people, and again, acknowledge the work that the museum does for us in all those things of arts and culture, heritage, science, and the art community. We have papers on page 75, councillors, and we'll be taking those as being read from our governance manager, Hannah White, but we have John and Andy available to answer any specific questions around the SOI. So I'll open it up for any questions, councillors. There being none, look, I would just like to acknowledge again, just John.
Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, there is one.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, to interrupt. I did have my hand up, but perhaps you didn't see it.
Sorry, it hasn't come up. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I just wanted to ask some questions around, on a similar line to the questions that I asked to the Globe, around in the officer's report 2.3 table 1, where council comments on the draft SOI have only partially been dealt with in the final SOI, and in particular, Te Manawa has not changed the target for visitor satisfaction or clarified how the measure likelihood of visitors to positively endorse Te Manawa to others will be measured. So I wonder if Te Manawa could just address why they haven't done that and what the plan is to deal with that recommendation.
Sure, shall I take that away?
Yes, thanks, Andy.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi nui ka koutou. Great to see you all here. Thank you for reviewing this for us today. Good question. Thank you, Lorna. What we did with the online reach is we've taken that off because we always hit a massive number on that one. And we're about to, at the end of September, appoint a digital coordinator who's going to form the basis of a lot of our digital work going forward, and that will give us lots of information we need around how to get the numbers that are going to be useful for us in the future in terms of digital online reach, and how people are engaging with our digital products will also increase because really diversify, because the products are going to be so different. So that's why we've kind of left that there and taken it off at the moment. So there's that one. The second one is around the likelihood of visitors to positively endorse. We've also done quite a bit of work in the last few months around surveys, around public surveys. And we commissioned in March quite a big survey from Morris Hargreaves McIntyre that does a lot of surveying around public opinion and public engagement with cultural institutions. And we've just received, we commissioned that in March, and we've just received the results, which are, they can't give them out publicly yet, but we've got those at the moment, which will give us a really good foundation for how we go ahead in the future to survey our public, because it's got some good basic and detailed and really thorough information there. We had a small version of that done by Events Insight, which I think was circulated to you all as part of our 9-month report, which is kind of a more succinct version, very much more succinct, because the Morris Hargreaves McIntyre one is huge. But anyway, it gives a bit of a sample of the types of detail and the thoroughness we need in terms of getting information about the public and how they engage with us and feel about us. So that's why that's sitting there at the moment, but it's in progress, and we feel quite good about the solid nature of the basis that we're going to work, the foundation we're going to work from. Does that answer those ones?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillors, is there any other questions of Te Manawa? I hope our technology isn't broken. I think it is. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have my hand up. Thank you, Team Te Manawa, for being with us today. I wanted just, along similar lines to Councillor Johnson, I just wanted to follow up on the comment made regarding the economic impact project, and ask if you could expand on that piece of work for us, maybe tell us where that's up to.
Yeah, kia ora, Rachel, thank you for that question. The report that I just referred to from Events Insight from Phil Hildred, who did that for us, is one of the pieces of work that feed into that, and that is actually the piece of work we have that is in our economic survey right now on how it's affected, on how Te Manawa affects and is contributing to the region. So that we feel quite good about that one.
Could you just, are you able to just summarise some of the feedback from that, Andy? I know it was part of your 9-month report, but it's the first time you've done some economic impact reporting, and maybe this is an opportunity just to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so it was the first deep dive we've done, and it was based on, we used people who are coming into the World Wildlife Photographer of the Year exhibition. So 277 surveys were completed by visitors to that exhibition, and that exhibition had a total of nearly, just over 12,000 visitors. And the main thing that it shows is a $1.3 million positive impact on the city for the duration of the show, plus a 913k value added, which is based on the spend of visitors to Palmerston North and Manawatu while the exhibition was on, which is an average daily spend for day visitor of $75 per person, or if people stayed overnight, then it would be $141.89 per person. So anyway, there's some detail in there that's quite useful for us in terms of how we feel like even that show, which was a koha, a donation-based show, still affects the bottom line in this region. So other things around 99% of visitors rated that exhibition good to, or very good to excellent. 48% came from outside the region, and 84% came from within a 2-hour drive. Wellington itself was 23.5%. So those are kind of the main, some of the main things, but there's the other information's in there document.
Oh, thank you. I think that just by itself, that little snapshot shows the value of that, doing that economic impact reporting. Great work. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, I've got the Mayor frozen in my pane. You may wish to take over the meeting while he resets.
Sure thing. We don't have any further questions?
There are no more in the queue.
Great, thank you. Well, I will look to the recommendation. I'm just working from a couple of screens, so just bear with me. So I'll move the recommendation. Is that seconded by Councillor Bowen, or is your hand seconded by Councillor Bowen? Great, thank you. And I'll open it up for any questions. Any comments. Councillor Bowen, would you like to make a comment?
Thank you. I will. I could keep talking until the Mayor gets back, but I won't. Just to say, as I would have done for the Regent, but my hand didn't work. Thank you to Te Manawa, the representatives of staff and board here today, and those not here today, for the work that's gone into putting together this statement of intent. I know from feedback from the other CCOs that Te Manawa takes an important leading role in that collaborative working that we've asked CCOs to do, especially in these kind of areas of things like economic impact reporting and visitor assessment. So I do want to say thank you for stepping into that space for us and being a resource to all of our CCOs, obviously working closely with our council staff to do that. But I think this statement of intent sets us up well for the next 12 months, whatever the next 12 months might hold. And we look forward to receiving your reporting on that. Thank you.
Kia ora, everybody. I'm back as the famous line from the movie. So, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to briefly comment to acknowledge Te Manawa for being really the first of the CCOs to really embrace the emissions reduction and managing down emissions, and for first coming to us with an ambitious aim, but now refining that into some quite tangible steps. I think that aligns quite well with our intent as an organization for city council emissions, as well as our broader community intent. So it's really wonderful to see that engagement there, and looking forward to seeing the progress on that over the years ahead.
Okay, so with Councillor Bowen, you've spoken, I believe.
I just want to pop back in, Mr. Mayor, to say that I've put forward an additional recommendation, which I think you have, which procedural around future reporting. I'm happy to speak to that separately. I'll just take it as read.
Okay, so can I just ask Sarah to get up the resolution, please? Thank you. So this is around Te Manawa Museums Trust final statement of intent 2021-24 that Te Manawa Museums Trust Board reporting arrangements return to align with legislative requirements. So, Councillor Bowen, this is the additional one you're talking about?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. To speak to it briefly, elected members will remember that at this time last year, in response to some questions that had been raised through the previous reporting, that we asked Te Manawa to do some additional reporting, which meant effectively they were reporting to every quarterly Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee, which is one more quarterly report than is required under the legislation. It's my view, and shared by my Deputy Chair, Councillor Barrett, that has served its purpose, that we're happy with the track that Te Manawa is on, and we are proposing that Te Manawa returns its reporting arrangements to those required under the legislation, as with all of our other CCOs. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I'll just quickly comment to it. Look, we've seen this with CEDA as well, where the organisations go into a constant reporting mode. Is it actually achieving what we want it to achieve? At times, arguably no. So I'm comfortable that there's still enough rigour around the reporting aspect of our biggest CCO, and I'm comfortable that as long as they come and report to us well, and they do, that we just that to me gives us enough peace of mind that things are progressing. To have extra reporting can actually just turn it into a report fest. So I'm going to support the councillor's amendment there, or recommendation, sorry. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Any other comments? Are we happy to take both of those together? Is anybody, don't tell me the hands, I'm not seeing the hands again. Is there any, just raise your hand if you want to speak. So Andy, did you want to answer a question?
No, I don't. I just wanted to give you some information quickly.
Okay, can we do that after the vote, if that's okay?
Yes, sure.
Nobody else would like to? Okay, we'll do, nobody's asked for a division, so we'll do this by a show of hands, if that's okay, again in voice. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Abstain? It is passed unanimously. So sorry, Andy, back to you.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to let you all know that today the team, or we've received our Qualmark badge. And it's a gold. So I really wanted to just acknowledge that and the huge amount of work the team have been doing over the last few years for that, and to your point, Brent. So yeah, so that was all. Thank you.
So that was a Qualmark, did you say?
Yes, Qualmark badge, gold. Yep.
Yeah, well done. Congratulations. Okay, well, thank you, Andy, and thank you, John, who I think's online there, and thank you, Jeff, and I think Catherine was the other one online. Appreciate that. Now, we go to the next one, and I will pass to the Deputy Mayor, and I'll just turn off my microphone and camera, and this is around number 12, page 115 around Acacia Birch. So Councillor Dingwall and I will just exit this. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I think you're just one report ahead. This one is the Acacia Birch statement of intent.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead. All right. Okay, we are at number 12, which is around Acacia Birch Trust Board statement of intent. I'd just like to acknowledge and welcome Grant O'Donnell, the chair of Acacia Birch. Welcome, Grant. And we have a report there from Hannah, our governance manager. Grant's available to answer any questions if need be. Councillors, I'll open it up there now for you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So just in the officers report 2.6 table 1, none of the council comments on draft have been dealt with, and I wondered if we could have an explanation as to why that is.
Yes, Councillor Johnson, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I really don't propose to speak to the statement of intent, given that the council's decision to take the operation in-house, while it's necessary for the statement of intent to be provided as a legislative requirement, nevertheless it's a nullity. It runs for the next 3 years, and of course that plan will just disappear when the operation is taken in-house. The 3-year plan, of course, was part of the 10-year plan, and we never did get any feedback on the 10-year plan. So really, we didn't think it was worth our time spending time altering a plan that wasn't going to be of any benefit to council or to the board.
So would it be fair to say that you've disengaged from this process then, Grant?
No, quite the opposite, and I'll talk to you about that shortly, if I may. But I'll be honest and say that of the changes that were recommended, we didn't think that they actually advanced the statement of intent in any event, particularly with regard to the issue of performance. We spent a considerable time both with assistance provided by a council consultant and also with council officers themselves, spent weeks, in fact, working through performance indices. And then when finally that was presented, we were told that it wasn't appropriate. We think that that reason was because the officers considering the SOI didn't really understand the marketing and the performance indices and the manner in which they were going to be carried out. We did have a discussion with them, but nevertheless there was still that suggestion for an alteration which didn't really show an understanding of the process that we had set out.
Grant, do you want to just further to that, just explain the transition?
Sure. So one of the reasons that I wanted to appear today was to correct an erroneous impression that was given and apparently taken at the last committee meeting, that the members of the board were deserting the trust and that were somehow derelict in their duty. And the facts are that the terms of appointment of 4 of the trustees were due to expire by virtue of the rules of the trust at the next AGM. And had council bothered to ask us, we would have advised that at least 3 of those 4 were not intending to seek reappointment beyond the AGM, irrespective of the Section 17 process. But in fact, the whole board, once the council's decision was made, determined to ensure that it would be a professional and trouble-free transition. And in that spirit, it's formed a transition group with council officers, which will incorporate council's external project managers, and which so far has operated effectively and on good terms. The board believes and hopes that the transition can be completed well before June 22. And for this reason, and to facilitate the process, it extended the AGM from September through to November, so that the current trustees would remain in office until all the heavy lifting had been done. The council appointed trustees can then take up their roles at the AGM with less risk in the way of any conflict of interest, and hopefully with no difficult issues to deal with at that stage, they having already been done. So that's where we are with the transition at the moment. So I'm open to any questions about it.
Great. Thank you, Grant. I think that you are right. There was some sort of, I wouldn't say perceived opinion, but it's great that you've, what I've heard too was very positive reports on the transition, and indeed the AGM and the effectively the retirement of those trustees happening was going to happen anyway. So thank you for clarifying that. I'll open it up for any more questions. There are none. So look, councillors, again, thank you, Grant, for being online. Thank you to you and your colleagues on the trust board. We have a recommendation around the SOI. If I could get that up, please, Sarah. It is somewhat academic, but we have the Acacia Birch Trust Board final statement of intent 2021 to 2024. Council agrees that the SOI 2021-24 submitted by the Trust Board attached as Appendix 1 of the report titled Acacia Birch Trust Board final statement of intent 2021-24. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Okay, what we'll do, people, is we will vote again by voice and hands. All those in favour? Aye.
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 Against?
Against.
Abstain? Okay, so that's passed. 14 votes for and 1 against. And administrators, if I could just get that correctly documented, thank you. Right, now I will, and thank you, Grant, for your being online. I will now pass over, because of the conflict of interest, around number 13, which is around appointments to the Trust Board from Council. So over to you, Deputy Mayor, and I'll just switch off. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we're now looking at item 13, the elected member appointments to the Acacia Birch Trust Board, page 137, and I'll invite Hannah to speak to that.
Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to take as read.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Councillors, do we have any questions? Councillor Bowen.
Not a question, Madam Chair, just indicating I'm happy to move or second that as required.
Thank you. Councillor Dennison, did you have a question?
Just happy to second it. Thank you, Chair.
Just checking if there are any questions. Great. Okay. Well, we've got the recommendation to appoint the Mayor, Grant Smith, and Councillor Renee Dingwall as trustees on the Acacia Birch Trust Board until 1 August 2022. That is moved by Councillor Bowen and seconded by Councillor Dennison, and I'll open it up for any comment. Great, there being no comment, we will vote by voices and a show of hands. So all in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Great, that has carried unanimously. I'll hand it back over to the Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillors, we'll go to number 15, and then we'll just signalling we'll have a break after that. So number 15 on our order paper is the Clearview Reserve, and it's a legislative paper here. It's presented by our property manager. It's an easement proposal to Powerco. It's on page 215 of your papers. And look, it is quite academic, but I'll pass to you, Bryce, if there's anything. Take it as being read, but there's any summary you need to provide.
No, happy to take it as read. You're correct. It is a administrative matter. This has come to council already, and as feedback on the public consultation. So this is the last step in the process to formalise the.
Thank you, Bryce. I'll open it up for any questions of Bryce. Okay, no, that's fine. Look, if I could go to you, Sarah, if we could have the recommendation up on screen, please. Or, sorry, recommendations. We have 4 of them there. As the administrating body of the Clearview Reserve, which is legally described as part of Lot 1 DP 69185, authorises the granting of an easement to convey electricity to Powerco. Number 2, that council, in exercise of its powers conferred on it by delegation under the Reserves Act of 1977, authorises the granting of an easement to convey electricity to Powerco. Number 3, that council notes the requirements of Section 4 of the Conservation Act 1987 have been satisfied in relation to consultation with iwi over granting an easement to convey electricity at Clearview Reserve. And finally, number 4, that council notes that the requirements of sections 119, 120 of the Reserves Act 1977 have been satisfied in relation to public notification, prior to the resolution to grant an easement to convey electricity over Clearview Reserve. Look, I'm happy to move all of those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comment. That is fine, councillors. Right, we'll do this again, all four together, with a show of hands and voice. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstain? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Right, councillors, we'll leave what is number 16, which is a larger document, till after our lunch. You've all deserve a lunch break. So if we see you back online, I'll give you an extra 5 minutes. We'll make it nice and round at 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.
Hannah, are you still there? I'm just wondering if we're rejoining.